Um, and that there's certainly some signal in there about kind of the way they're looking at it and whether they're looking at it in quite the way that we think they should be looking at it at BPI. I think you need to spend a little bit more time kind of parsing through exactly what he meant by some of the stuff that he was saying. But certainly the case that this is just a huge moment, and is sort of confirmation that BPI's view of Bitcoin as this real strategic and national asset, is landing for people at the highest levels of our government.
One of the things that he said, and he repeated it twice, I believe, which was kind of, maybe a seemingly innocuous statement, but I thought was actually really important, was just saying Bitcoin is a reality. Just that's a very simple statement. Bitcoin is reality. He repeated it twice. But I think that's actually so important. He's not saying it's no longer the dismissive, well, this is some, just speculative magic internet money thing that, tech bros and nerds in their mom's basement are using. Like, he's not being dismissive at all. This is an extremely high-ranking military official, a no-nonsense guy. The guy's got no time or patience for
Yeah.
bullshit, saying this is a reality. Like, that's a very, very important and strong statement, I think, because it's acknowledging, look, this is real. This is here. This is not something that is somehow just a speculative or theoretical or whatever. It's here. It's a reality. We need to deal with it. You can tell he's also a little bit guarded with some of his words,
Yeah.
obviously, because this is being, broadcast everywhere. He's not going to, open up his whole playbook here. But clearly they're thinking about it, I think, in ways that go beyond just the, let's say, just the number go up side of things. He was asked about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, but he went on to talk about proof of work. He went on to mention that it's a computer science tool. Again, went on to mention, that this isn't just about, the algorithmic nature of it, but it imposing more cost than just the algorithmic security of the networks. He talks about power projection. Again, that's sort of a Jason Lowery hat tip a little bit there, I think,
Yeah.
on the power projection side. But I mean, do you think that there clearly is a lot of conversation going on, a lot of which you guys are privy to, probably some of which you cannot exactly discuss? But are you seeing, I mean, do you think that this sort of language from top military officials, we're not talking about politicians, we're not talking about bureaucrats, right? We're talking about military officials, guys who, as inefficient as many parts of our government may be, our military gets shit done. Do
Yeah.
you think this is sort of a bit of a, watershed moment, a little bit of a shift in the paradigm where it's like, hey, this isn't just politicians posturing over it. This is the military saying, look, guys, we need to look into this. We're looking into it. Again, Bitcoin is a reality, as he said. To me, this seems like quite a shift for anyone who's been paying attention.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's certainly in the public eye a major shift. We have not had a military or national security, sort of person or power player quite to the level of Paparo here come out on the record and say, look, like we think Bitcoin's a real thing. We take Bitcoin very seriously, right? I think that's certainly a read off of what he said today. But behind closed doors, like I think this is many years in the making, and this has been a major strategic focus of BPI, right? Publicly, it's much easier to talk about, hey, Senator Lummis came out and said this, or Congressman Nick Begich put out the Bitcoin for America Act. We obviously like can't be behind the scenes talking about the conversations that we're having with folks at the highest level of the national security and military complexes. And so, you know, it's certainly not the case that we're the only ones working on this kind of thing. It's certainly not the case that whatever comes out of national security or military conversations, in the public eye was a direct sort of influence of BPI. But it is a major focus of ours, and you know this is, I think, really the effect of years. Like I was saying, Pines' first paper back in 2021. This is the product of years of um, educational efforts, not just, with the executive branch um, or with Congress, but with really like the key decision makers in Washington, D.C., which is people like, Paparo here.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't know if you've spoken to Mr. Pine since this has come out, but I'm
Not
sure
yet,
he's
no.
having a nice moment for himself. I can only imagine.
Yeah, I mean, look, this was sort of like the furthest thing outside of the Overton window. Like the the case for like Congress people sort of posturing in a pro Bitcoin way is very clear, right? There's a lot of voters. We saw that in in the previous presidential election cycle. There's a very real incentive for people in Congress to come out and say like, look, I love Bitcoin, I'm going to support Bitcoin and all that. The incentive for someone like Paparo to go on the record and say, look, I think Bitcoin's a reality. I think this is a very real technology that is, essential to our strategy in the US military and particularly in our strategy against China. Like the incentive for that is like, look, we're like kicking off some kind of like nation state race here. Like we're going to be very clear about where we stand on this because there's an interest behind this, not because we want votes or, we want money or anything like that. It's just a totally different actor in the DC world. And I'm not sure if it was in this clip in particular, but the question from Senator Tuberville was really pointed and pointed to a paper that came out of one of the like key think tanks for the Chinese Communist Party, where they're talking about uh, a paper, funny enough, that BPI had written about a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, about Bitcoin being a strategic national asset. It was from one of our fellows, Matthew Ferranti. Um, and like to us, that was evidence that, hey, like the Chinese Communist Party is thinking about Bitcoin as a strategic asset. Like their key policy thinkers are thinking about Bitcoin in this way. And that was a direct result of, the executive order that we saw come out of the Trump administration. And so again, like it's not totally obvious, I think, unless you're kind of putting the pieces together in moments like this, that like there is this real kind of nation state like game going on of, hey, the United States, they built this strategic reserve. Obviously, we haven't funded it yet, besides the seized Bitcoin. But then, we write a paper about it, and then the CCP is thinking about, hey, the US moved on this, and they have people thinking about this. We should be thinking about it too. And then you get Paparo in the mix, and he's like, "Hey, China's thinking about this." So it's this whole kind of like thought process, and this is really like how the kind of gears of power move, at the nation state level of like, "Hey, we're going to posture, we're going to see how others react, and then we're going to come back." And this is just further evidence that it's working.
That's it. So the Chinese the CCP like research report was actually a direct response to both some of BPI's work and also obviously the Trump admin's executive order regarding the establishment of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, they directly
Wild.
cited a paper that we had written at BPI.
I mean, that's it's a nice compliment
That's
in
for
a
sure.
strange way,
Yeah.
right? Probably a very surreal one. I can only imagine. But it is interesting because again, these are things. Okay, as you correctly pointed out, politicians, they have a very clear incentive for being like there's no incentive to be anti-Bitcoin anymore, right? Like Elizabeth Warren,
Absolutely.
I'm not sure what she's still doing, but it's like you are not going to help yourself by being anti-Bitcoin because you are just being anti-reality, you're being anti-freedom, you're being just anti-common sense at the end of the day. It may look good to a couple of super uninformed people, but ultimately anybody with half of a functioning brain knows that like, look, this is something that is a net positive and is of strategic importance. Very obviously, like on multiple levels, right? Whether it be, kind of a hash power level, whether it be a just accumulation level. And so I'm curious if you think, as we see now, sort of a transition, and perhaps a lot of these conversations have for sure been happening in the military and higher levels of intelligence agencies behind the scenes, not as public as the politicians, up on their soapbox or
Yeah.
talking about these things. They've obviously been happening behind the scenes, but now they're starting to project that a little bit into the conversation, into the kind of open conversation, the open forum. Is this sort of an indication that you think, Bitcoin has been sort of highly politicized? It's been painted with a bit of a partisan brush, I think incorrectly. Of course, money's political, Bitcoin is political, but it's not partisan.
Hmm.
Some have tried to paint it one way, people trying to paint it red, right?
Yeah.
And the blue folks may not like that so much. But do you think that sort of the insertion of the military narrative in here, or the narrative from high-ranking military people, sort of pours some cold water on that to say, like, look, this isn't about your politics. This isn't about your next election. This isn't about you raising money. This is about the United States and it's the strategic importance of this asset outside of these short-term political cycles. Is that? I mean, that's what I'm kind of projecting onto here. Do you have the
Yeah.
same thought, or do you have a different perspective?
No, you're spot on here. Look, the people at the highest level of our government are actually not people who are kind of like red or blue or, playing the sort of like party game. It's these like sort of lifelong national security military officials who, they don't go anywhere. Like it doesn't matter who's in the White House or who's in Congress. Like these are really like the key operators of like power within the United States government. And, it's certainly harder to reach these people, right? Like it's a huge signal that like, hey, we have Paparo here like on record talking about Bitcoin because these people, traditionally it seems like they probably wouldn't have taken Bitcoin very seriously. And so this is just a sign that we're winning. Definitely, keep our head on a swivel with these people, right? They are sharks. And like you said, as inefficient as the government is, the military is, they really do get shit done. Um, but this is just really strong evidence that like Bitcoin has really permeated, beyond the sort of like party politics of the United States. It's truly embedded in kind of decision making at the highest level, and you know it makes it much harder for a president, whether it be, President AOC or whoever the fuck,
Oh, dear God.
um, to
Let's hope
say
not.
like, right, no, for sure. To say like, look, this is like not a serious thing. Anybody who's using Bitcoin is a scammer. This is only for criminals or whatever it may be. Like whatever, the narrative du jour, right? Um, if the people at the highest level of the government who are pulling the strings for even the president on a lot of these issues are saying like, look, this is a reality. We think this is a real kind of strategic consideration, then it really, pours cold water on stuff like that. Um, so I think this is absolutely huge. Your read is exactly right. Like the returns to educating someone like Papara or bringing someone like that into the fold and saying like, hey, this is what's going on here with this technology. This is why you should be taking it seriously. Like again, the returns to that are just enormous. Way more than any anyone in Congress or really probably even in the executive branch. There's certainly people like the Treasury Secretary who are really crucial to a national Bitcoin strategy. But you know, the people like Paparo are the ones really like pulling the strings, and that's something we've identified very clearly at BPI, and big win for us today for sure.
Yeah, and I'm curious if you think does the because the strategic Bitcoin reserve, obviously most folks who have especially been watching this show will be aware or have been following BPI's work. First of all, a lot of the language that was in there was thanks to you guys, and a lot of the kind of reports that you wrote and information that you gave the administration and have tried to give to every administration. It's not a one-sided thing here.
For sure.
Some more receptive than others, but that okay, we established a quote strategic Bitcoin reserve with budget neutral pathways to be able to acquire more. They said they weren't going to dispose of any more. There was separate treatment given for Bitcoin versus digital assets, which they said we're not going to acquire more unless it's through confiscatory measures. We will dispose of them if we want to. So that was good to see as well. But since then, I think there's been a bit of, and maybe some disappointment from folks who were thinking, Bitcoin strategic reserves coming. Government's going to start printing money to buy Bitcoin. My bags are going to get pumped so hard,
Yeah.
and maybe had a little bit of a too rosy impression of how things would move in DC there.
Sure.
So I'm curious if statements like this at all change in kind of your outlook in terms of what might actually be able to gain some political momentum, some a little bit of a a tailwind in terms of that strategic Bitcoin reserve. Again, he was asked about Papar was asked about the strategic Bitcoin reserve. He sort of skirted that question, directly, but more so went into just kind of talking about the broader strategic implications. I mean, he's bringing up, a proof of work, which I think is like kind of that's very telling right there in terms of the way he's thinking about it from a national security perspective. But does this at all, how are you guys thinking about this at BPI in terms of, okay, where, what happens next for an actual, any movement on the strategic Bitcoin reserve? Or does the strategic Bitcoin reserve just kind of stay in this, hey, we're going to add to it whenever we confiscate Bitcoin, probably won't get added to through any other ways, even though these budget neutral pathways exist? I know there's work to try to get it codified into law because an executive order can just be, just taken away basically. Where are you guys at with this? What's your thinking? Is this something that you guys are still actively focusing on from sort of the policy perspective?
Yeah, I mean, look, the second question that Senator Tuberville asked was like, what suggestions do you have for us in Congress as we're thinking about this issue, right? And um, the answer I think was maybe not as as clean as maybe we would have hoped it would be, but I think if you're reading between the lines a little bit, he's saying like, look, this is a serious issue. I'm interested in having sort of dialogue with a bunch of congressional offices about what Bitcoin means for us from a strategic perspective. And the only real kind of like policy lever that Congress is looking at right now is a statutory strategic Bitcoin reserve. And so, again, if you read between the lines another layer here, it's, hey, we're taking this seriously and we want to have conversations with Congress people about, kind of the seriousness of this issue, how quickly we need to act, what it means to act. And the pathway for them to act is to enact a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And so there's a very clear kind of through line here. And a little teaser for your audience here. Paparo will be testifying in Congress tomorrow, in the House of Representatives, and we might see another question, kind of digging a little bit deeper. So stay tuned for that. But look, there's a very clear pathway for Congress to really kind of enact this policy stance that Paparo has shared with everyone today, and that is to pass the Bitcoin Act in some form or another. And, to your question about kind of where things stand, right? The executive branch has also like signaled very clearly, and I'm talking really here about Patrick Witt, who's the executive director of the Crypto Council in the White House, has made it very clear that they're still intent on, some kind of purchase program for the strategic Bitcoin reserve, that we're not sort of satisfied with the pure sort of we're going to confiscate Bitcoin and add it that way. Um, this is just a slow process. We've talked about this before. But there's absolutely no reason to think that like the momentum or all hope is lost here in terms of like real purchases by the United States government. Again, I think like the gears of the policy machine are just they're sort of grinding to life a little bit here, and hopefully this is a real spark.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's heartening to see. I want to get into some more of kind of the U.S. China dichotomy there a little bit as it relates to government's positions on Bitcoin, because I think it's worth digging into a little bit. We are just going to hit a very quick commercial break first, though, and then I've got a couple more things I want to dig into with you there. Maybe we'll get a little bit of an update on where we've gotten to or where we haven't gotten to with clarity as well.
Yeah.
Still waiting for clarity on clarity, it seems. But we'll hit all that and more with Zach Cohen from BPI when we come back. We're going to hit a quick commercial break first, so don't touch that dial. We'll be right back here on RoxomTV.
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
Welcome back to RoxomTV. My name is Walker America. The price of Bitcoin is $75,200 infinitely printable Federal Reserve notes per coin. We're going to bring back up our guest, Zach Cohen from the Bitcoin Policy Institute. We've been talking about a four-star Admiral Paparo basically saying that very nice things about Bitcoin, saying that testifying before the Senate, saying that Bitcoin shows incredible potential. Bitcoin is a reality. Bitcoin's talking about proof of work, power projection, more than just algorithmic security of networks, all these things. And specifically, Admiral Paparo is basically in charge of the Indo-Pacific Command. And when we look, Zach, at sort of the the differences between how the US has approached Bitcoin, especially in this last administration, this current administration, I should say, and how China has for years. We see a pretty distinct difference there. There's a very big gap between how the Trump administration and the current, CCP, Chinese Communist Party, treats Bitcoin, Bitcoin miners, Bitcoin holders, Bitcoin in general as a tool for freedom, a freedom tech tool, right? And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts. Just, a lot of people have this position that, like, look, why are we even trying to engage with politicians? Why do we even bother with this? Bitcoin doesn't need politicians. This is about freedom money. We shouldn't even be talking to the government. It's just going to bring bad things. How do you guys think about this at BPI? Because obviously you've taken the exact opposite approach to that, which is let's engage with our elected officials. Let's engage with, the folks in the swamp. So how do you guys think about that? And I guess what's sort of your response to people who are coming out, who are going to come out and have come out and saying, like, look, we shouldn't even be bothering with the politicians. This is bad news.
Um, one is to look at, like, hey, how bad could it be, right? And all you have to do is look to China for that. China banned Bitcoin. They're, still mining Bitcoin in a semi like national way, but it's illegal for private companies and, whatever's going on over there, we don't even really know. But it's without a doubt an extremely hostile environment for anyone who's interested in Bitcoin, who wants to own Bitcoin, who wants to mine Bitcoin, who wants to do anything with Bitcoin, maybe even talk about Bitcoin. That could end up in a sticky situation for you. Versus the United States, right? Where, and this is the other way of looking at it, is like, okay, so if we take the opposite of that, what does it look like when a country embraces Bitcoin, right? Like you and I, Walker, we're both Americans. We both, I think feel pretty strongly about the American project and what it means, for the world and humanity. And so, the other approach is to say, well, you know, how does the world look? How does the United States look? How does, any country look when they embrace Bitcoin? And, BPI's mission is or vision is a world where, Bitcoin and America thrive together, because there's worlds where, we take the China approach and Bitcoin keeps doing what it's doing and America gets cooked, like that. That's not the approach I think you or I or anyone who really believes in the American project, would want to take. And so again, there's these two ways of looking at it. It's like, okay, well, if we don't, if we go the wrong way with this, like China did, it's going to make our lives miserable as people who really believe in what Bitcoin has to offer. If we take the opposite approach, we say, hey, what does a country look like when they've embraced Bitcoin? And we're certainly not there yet with the United States, but Bitcoin really is like a manifestation of what America was founded on. It's sort of the highest level of freedom, property rights, sort of self-determination, right? And it's just a very natural kind of pairing for the United States to say, hey, we believe in this technology. We want to foster this technology. That they've said that very clearly at the highest levels, thinking particularly about the executive branch and the president. And, I think we've seen really strong results from that. Like, I think that's just sort of undeniable. There's certainly still things going on that we certainly wouldn't like to see, thinking about Samurai and Tornado Cash, and, that's certainly still a major drag on Bitcoin developers here in the United States, right? There's a sort of lasting impact of that I don't think is going to go away. But kind of at large, we've seen a really positive direction here, and I think we should learn from that and say, hey, if we work with the government, as little as we may trust them, we can try to steer the ship as much as possible. It's obviously a heavy ship, and it's stuck in its ways, but why not try, right? Because I think we believe in the two things that would make it work, which is we believe in Bitcoin and we believe in the American project.
Amen to that. And, even we zoom into like the individuals within the government, we zoom in just a little bit closer. One thing you and I have joked about before is, okay, would you rather have a government full of Senator Lummises or
Right.
Senator Warrens, right?
Yeah.
Do you want a government full of people that are openly pro-freedom, pro-Bitcoin, or openly anti-freedom, anti-Bitcoin? Like, I would rather have those, even if the policy is not perfect. I'm not saying that government is going to, like, we don't need government to save us, right? We don't need government to save Bitcoin, not at all. However, if given the choice, I would like my government to infringe. I like them to infringe not at all on my
Yeah.
rights, right? But that's good luck there, right? Good
Yeah.
luck there anywhere in the world. That's just not happening. So I'd like them to be as small as possible, infringe as little as possible. And with regard to Bitcoin, like, yes, you can use Bitcoin without the government's permission. You can. I do it every day, right? You don't need the government's permission. However, the government can make your life very, very difficult in terms of being able to use Bitcoin without having them come and put kick down your door. And Tornado Cash, the Samurai Wallet case, Bill and Keone, all of these are examples of the government overstepping and just a disgusting kind of breach of justice. Go to billandkeone.org. I'll keep beating that drum on here. Those guys are still in federal prison. For yeah, we don't even we've gotten into this a lot, but I'm going to keep getting into it.
Yeah.
People should go and check out that story. It's all at billandkeone.org. You can sign the petition and go back and check out previous episodes that I've done, conversations with Keone before he went into prison. But these are things where you're like, look, that happened. That's still happening. I don't want that to continue to happen. I don't want that to continue to get worse. I don't want that to be exacerbated more and more and more. But without people like folks like you at BPI who are talking to politicians, trying to show them like, hey, look, this is anti-American what you're doing. Without politicians like Senator Lummis and many others, but I like to use her as an example because she's been so vocally and staunchly pro-Bitcoin for a long time. Without that, this is what you get. You get people being thrown in jail for writing open source code, right? For writing privacy tech. You get, the government cracking down on, needing to report every little thing that you do with Bitcoin. And if you don't, and we find out about it, like you don't want that. You don't want China. You don't want a communist system. You want America. You want the constitutional republic that we have with the constitution that protects our rights and does not let the government infringe upon them. And that extends obviously to Bitcoin. And so for me, this is just kind of like again, I get a little frustrated when people are like, well, you shouldn't be pandering to the government. It's like, it's not about pandering to the government. It's about trying to actually subvert the government from within. Not that I'm saying BPI is subverting the government. They're
Well, maybe
not
a
at
little
all.
bit.
Maybe just like a tiny bit. But like, Bitcoin, as Gladstein has said many times, Bitcoin is a Trojan horse for freedom, right? The number go up as a Trojan horse for the freedom go up. Getting more people who actually grok Bitcoin into the highest levels of government, whether they are elected or they are military officials, whatever they may be, to me, that is a net benefit. Like Bitcoin is in a way a bit of a mind virus, right? And once it gets in there, it is going to change you. And if you truly grok it, and I think that has the power, individuals have the power who are within government to change it. That's what I'd like to see. It's not about sucking up to politicians. It's not about trying to get them to, pander to you or to pander to them. No, it's about fundamentally trying to shrink the size of government, change the way that it functions, and doing that in a peaceful manner through open source technology with game theoretical principles that lend itself to doing exactly that versus a situation like China, which personally I don't want. It seems like a no-brainer to me. Apparently it's not. Maybe I'll get some shit for this. Who knows? I get shit for a lot, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah, no, but I think your point is right. And it's perfectly reasonable, I think, for people to be skeptical. I myself was skeptical and even remain skeptical, about kind of the, how much effect we can have and whether our effects will be only good. At the same time, I think we've had like really strong evidence that a lot of the work we're doing is being successful, and that we're winning champions over in Congress, and we have people who are watching out for developer protections in Congress, right? To talk about the Clarity Act again, like we don't have a vote on that yet. But we do know that we have champions in Congress who are sitting in their offices and saying, hey, like when we get the draft bill for, the final market structure version, we're going to raise the alarm bells if there's no protections for open source developers in there. Like we will stand firm on this. We know the industry is behind us on this. We've done the sort of educational and background work to understand why this is a really crucial issue. And we're gonna make a fuss if this doesn't go the way we want it to. And so, that versus not having those people, like, I just feel like it's a pretty clear decision there. And then I think BPI more broadly, right? Like one of the programs that we just launched, and we're trying to get funding for right now is a congressional fellowship program. And so, Walker, you said BPI isn't like subverting the government, but we are like literally installing Bitcoiners into congressional offices. We've had 4 congressional fellows, so people somewhat early in their careers basically go in and work as staffers for Congresspeople. We've got folks in, and again, 4 offices now, and we'd like to have them in every office. There's 535 offices in Congress across the House and the Senate. And if we get a Bitcoiner in every single office, like, we're going to win. And so if you're interested in supporting that, shoot me an email. My email is on BPI's website, or DM me on, any platform. But we are like literally trying to subvert the government. We are trying to get Bitcoiners in there. We have Bitcoiners in there, right? We have Senator Cynthia Lummis, great example, Congressman Nick Begich, but we need more. And we need more people like, Admiral Paparo. And so that's really like kind of the work that we're doing at BPI. And, I think we're winning, right? And when there are threats, we also have kind of watchdogs for that. And so it's, a two-prong approach to some extent.
I love it. And folks should absolutely, if they're interested in that, go in there, help subvert our government peacefully, help fix the broken system, right? And you
Yeah.
mentioned the Clarity Act a little bit. Maybe we could touch on that before we've got a few minutes left here, just to see. I mean, you mentioned there's still not a vote on it. Obviously, something that you and I have been beating the drum on a lot, and BPI has, is the developer protections part of that. There's been a lot of jockeying back and forth between the banks and the big, crypto lobby, the Coinbases and such around the stablecoin yield. Has there been any meaningful movement on this in recent weeks, though? Are we still just sort of gridlocked? Is it still just kind of in that wait and see mode? Do you guys have anything new that because some of your sources have been able to share with you?
So as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been sort of like complete progress, or sort of like a complete resolution to the yield question. I think my understanding is that they've been sort of close to a final agreement for a couple weeks now. And I think that there was a hearing today that I haven't had a chance to look at, kind of what the result of that was. Um, but, bottom line here, I do think there's appetite to get this thing done. When we talked kind of earlier this year, I can't remember exactly when we started doing this show, but I think, my point to you is there's a limited window here for us to get clarity done before the midterms. And then, again, if the midterms don't go Republican, then there's going to be a lot less momentum for this, post midterms. And so, like, the real window to do something is now. And I think, you know, folks like Patrick Witt have been pretty clear about that. Like, hey, if you if you want to get something done, you're gonna have to make some compromises, which is, a shitty position, right? Because the banks are being wholly unreasonable on this issue, right? Bitcoin versus crypto aside, like, this is kind of a free markets question, and the banks are using their political power to make sure that folks like Coinbase and Tether and whoever can't really make a competitive product that's going to compete with the banks when at baseline, like, a stablecoin is every bit as good as a bank, right? They're both centralized, but one has a lot of benefits and is sort of a larger market participant than it or would be a larger market participant than it is right now, just purely because of the regulatory situation. And so yeah, there's a bit of a compromise to be had here. I would love to just see stablecoins get, full license to offer yield and, do do whatever they want, because I think that goes against the banks, which is really kind of, I think, what we're all after here to some extent. But I do suspect there will be a compromise in the next couple weeks, and that will go to vote pretty quickly.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm of the same opinion with regard to the stablecoin yield. It's like, let them do it. Oh no, the banks don't like it, and
Right.
all of our public policy is apparently just based around what the big banks want. Like, who cares? Like, give people more options for things. Doesn't matter what you think of stable coins. That's not the point here. The point is whether or not they should have the freedom to be able to offer yield on these products to compete with the banks, then making forcing the banks to actually start offering better services to people.
Right.
Yes, with Bitcoin, you can be your own bank, but people are still going to use fiat for at least the foreseeable future. And I mean, honestly, it's like with regard to stablecoins, it's like they just, they make the banking system look so silly,
Yeah.
as Bitcoin does. And again, they do not have all the properties of Bitcoin. They are very much confiscatable. They are freezable. It is not a sovereign form of money. but they also have their uses, right? And
For
they're
sure.
certainly a lot more useful than regular old dollars sitting in your Chase account.
Yeah.
Not least of which because you can send them 24/7, 365, and there are no holidays for them. So it's like just kind of a no-brainer. But I'm curious too, you mentioned the midterms. And one thing that we've consistently tried to kind of tap on as through these conversations over these past months, Zach, is just around that potential for, they always, it's always a red wave or a blue wave, like, right? It's, it's one of the two. The pendulum swings back and forth. You guys have worked really hard to try and reach across the aisle. Again, Bitcoin is political, money is political, but Bitcoin is not partisan. You guys have tried to really make sure that you're extending the olive branches to folks on all sides of the aisle and in between. How are you guys looking at this in terms of these upcoming midterms? Kind of Clarity Act aside, looking towards the future now, are you guys feeling hopeful that this is something that's starting to get a little bit more, bipartisan buy-in from more and more folks? Is it a trickle? Are we going to see a flood? Or does it appear that, the people are just pretty entrenched with their kind of red-blue dichotomy, and they view, for whatever, because Trump is, pro Bitcoin, they view Bitcoin as like a Trumpy thing. What's your
Yeah.
read on that from the swamp?
Yeah, I think it cuts both ways, right? Like what you said about Bitcoin being sort of, Trumpy or Trump coin-esque, is just like certainly the case, right? Like it's the undeniable truth at this point, and for however much progress we've made with the Trump administration, we're probably gonna have to contend with that for quite a while. And so that's certainly a reality. The other way it cuts is like the incentives to be sort of like anti-Bitcoin at this point are fully dissolved, and the incentives to be pro-Bitcoin are probably as strong as they've ever been, right? It's worth underscoring that BPI is, we're a 501c3 think tank. We don't do any kind of lobbying. We have no sort of, ability to influence any of these midterm elections. That's really, going to be our friends over at Fairshake and, the larger kind of crypto lobby. But it's very clear that Fairshake has been, successful, and that they were successful in, the previous election cycle, in 2024. That, they had a large part in getting Trump elected. They had a large part in swinging Congress the way it swung. And I would be very surprised if we don't see that again in the midterms. And so, you know, again, it cuts both ways, right? Like for Democrats, it will always be the case that Bitcoin is sort of tainted red a little bit. At the same time, like the incentive to be pro crypto and including pro Bitcoin is very real. Like there's just a lot of campaign dollars being thrown around by crypto at large. And you got to find a way to balance those two things. Certainly, I would not like to be a Democrat, in this midterm election. That's a really tough position to be in. So, good luck to all those folks. But, I think the other angle here that's going to be really interesting is like what emerges as the primary narrative, right? Like I think crypto at large was like necessarily a big conversation point in the previous election cycle. I am curious if it's going to be again. I think there's a lot of things that Americans are concerned about right now. I think chiefly like AI is going to be a real like hot button issue for this midterm cycle. I think a lot of people are very concerned about it. I think in our bubble, people are like, hey, this AI thing is great. Like we're seeing like very major returns, and we're all feeling like kind of, optimistic about it. I think, a very large contingent of people are like deeply concerned. Um, and maybe with very good reason, but the question I think is going to be, how does the US government respond to that? And to me, like that's going to be the real kind of like big issue that we see in the midterm cycle. And it's not going to be crypto in my mind.
Yeah, it is interesting. If sometimes we forget that we're in a bit of a
Right.
bubble, right? And most people are not privy to, let's see, the information, even the conversations happening within this. And there's obviously bubbles within bubbles within bubbles. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be messy. I mean, honestly, it's also tiresome sometimes.
Yeah.
Where it's like, what if we just tried shrinking the government and maybe actually getting some stuff done and not taking as much of people's tax dollars and like not getting embroiled in so many foreign wars.
Yeah,
But
wouldn't
it's,
that be
yeah,
nice?
wouldn't that, I mean, boy, a guy can dream, right? A guy
Yeah.
can dream. But no, Zach, I want to get you out of here on time. So I really appreciate you coming in. I want to give you a chance too to maybe just, again, tap on that, the fellowship opportunities, anything else you guys have coming up for BPI, any reports that you've got that have come out or are coming out that you want people to check on, or anything else you'd like to have people know.
Yeah, definitely want to double tap the, Congressional Fellowship Program. You can learn more about that on our website. The gist of it is, we're basically finding Bitcoiners, people like us who want to go in and work in the government and have a real impact. And we're funding that 100%. So they're 1 year long fellowships, and it takes every dollar. This is totally a grassroots movement, and so if you're interested in contributing to that, there's a donate link on our website, and obviously appreciate that. If you want to reach out, you can find me on X. I don't know if my X handle's linked on here, but it's at Zach Cohen _. My email is on BPI's website. So yeah, just find a way to get in contact. I would love to talk to you. Our team will be in Vegas. Walker, I know you'll be in Vegas too.
Not
So.
anymore, unfortunately,
Oh
but I'll be
no,
there in
okay.
spirit. Yeah.
Okay, we'll be there in spirit. But yeah, if you are in Vegas and you want to connect, shoot me a message. But yeah, appreciate the time, Walker. It's always good to sit down together.
Always, always, Zach. And yeah, go to btcpolicy.org. If you're interested too, there's a ton of great just reports. I mean, going back years now. I highly recommend people check some of those out too. They're extremely well written, great research. You guys had, the most recent one of yours that I've read was back in March, but it was around, what money AI was choosing to use, which was just a really fascinating one.
Yeah.
You guys are always putting out great stuff like that. So appreciate the work that you guys do there in the heat of the swamp, to try and get us a few more Senator Lummises and a few fewer Elizabeth Warrens. Zach Cohen from the Bitcoin Policy Institute, thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure, man.
Thank you, Walker. I like that. I'm going to use that. A few more Senator Lummises and a few less Senator Warrens. It's going to be my new Twitter bio.
There we go. Feel free. That one's free. It won't cost you a thing. Next one I'll have to charge you a few sats for. All
Cool,
right.
man. See you
Thanks,
next
Zach.
week.
All right, guys, and we are going to be right back here in just a moment on RoxomTV. But first, we're going to cut to a quick commercial break. Then we'll be back here with more Bitcoin and world news. Do not touch that dial. I will see you here in just a moment.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
How about Stretch preferred stock on Roxom? Receive 11.5% monthly cash dividends paid in Bitcoin.
11.5% paid in Bitcoin? How is that possible?
It's real. Stretch dividends on Roxom gives 11.5% monthly cash dividends paid in Bitcoin.
Dang! I want everyone pitching Roxom to your clients. corporate traders, asset managers, old, young. Stretch on Roxom is for everyone.
Now that's a birthday gift. 11.5% in Bitcoin.
We are in heaven at 11.5. 11.5%. 11.5%.
Oh, I forgot to mention, dividends on Roxom are paid in Bitcoin. Stretch your income, 11.5% paid in Bitcoin.
Stretch your income to 11.5, get 11.5 in Bitcoin and Roxom. 11.5%. 11.5%.
Welcome back to RoxomTV. My name is Walker America. The price of Bitcoin is 75,500 and odd change. Infinitely printable Federal Reserve notes per Bitcoin. We're going to dive into our next hour of stories here. The first one, Kevin Warsh, Trump's pick to replace Jerome Powell as Fed chair, testified before the Senate Banking Committee today. When asked by Senator Cynthia Lummis on his views on digital assets, he had an interesting answer.
That digital assets should be incorporated into our financial industry so Americans have new investment opportunities and consumer protections.
Senator, digital assets are already part of the fabric of our financial services industry in the United States. Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Walsh.
Senator. What stood out wasn't just the exchange, it was also the framing. No dismissal, just a clear acknowledgement that digital assets are already part of the U.S. financial system. And it tracks with what Warsh's history. Kevin Warsh has been one of the few Fed chair contenders to willingly speak about Bitcoin without the usual skepticism. In prior interviews, he pushed back on the condescension toward buyers, arguing Bitcoin can impose discipline on policymakers, not a replacement for the dollar, but a signal when policy goes off track.
You made reference to Bitcoin, and I thought I heard a little bit of condescension that people are buying Bitcoin and these things.
But doesn't it, Charlie Munger, this is 2 or 3 years before he died, Charlie Munger attacked Bitcoin. He called it evil, in part because it would begin to undermine the Fed's ability to manage the economy.
Or it could provide market discipline. Or it could tell the world that things need to be fixed.
Bitcoin does not make you nervous.
Bitcoin does not make me nervous.
Today, he also weighed in on central bank digital currencies, drawing a clear line against the Fed moving in that direction.
Currencies. Do you agree that the Federal Reserve has no legal right to issue a central bank digital currency?
Senator, I agree that they don't have the right, and I think it would be a bad policy choice.
Somebody just put an exclamation mark on that. Under your chairmanship of the Federal Reserve, you will not have the Federal Reserve explore or any way move towards a central bank digital currency.
If it's within the power of the chairman of the Federal Reserve, I agree with that statement.
If Warsh gets confirmed, markets will read it as a signal about the next regime at the Fed. Rates, liquidity, and the broader stance toward alternative assets could all shift. And for Bitcoin, the signal is subtle but important. Warsh doesn't frame it as something to shut down. He treats it more like a warning system, a market check on bad monetary policy. And to give you a few more thoughts on this here, I think it is really remarkable. We talked earlier with Zach Cohen from the Bitcoin Policy Institute about 4-star Admiral Paparo talking about Bitcoin's importance for national security as a strategic asset. Also, he talked about proof of work. He mentioned Bitcoin is a reality. This language coming from him now, this language that's been coming from Kevin Warsh for some months now, since people have kind of had their eyes on him. That old clip that we played, it's a few months old now, where he talks about, look, I'm not threatened by Bitcoin. I'm not worried about Bitcoin. He basically says Bitcoin can be the canary in the coal mine, can be the indicator that there is something wrong in the financial system. People are fleeing to Bitcoin fleeing from fiat to Bitcoin or from other assets to Bitcoin. This is an indicator that the chosen demigods at the Federal Reserve can look at and say, maybe something is amiss. And so again, anybody who knows me knows that I'm not some Federal Reserve simp, that I think that the Federal Reserve should absolutely be abolished and that it is a abhorrent perversion of what our founding fathers would have wanted. But that's beside the point. At least, given that the cabal of central bankers, unelected bankers at the Federal Reserve exists and will, unfortunately, probably for some time, I find it really fascinating that this potential Federal Reserve chair to replace current chair Jerome Powell has such a unique perspective on Bitcoin. And then look at Treasury Secretary Bessent as well. Again, a very pro-Bitcoin stance on both of them, as well, a very anti-CBD stance. These are two things just taken, if these were just two guys off of the street, that you'd say, wow, this guy's pro-Bitcoin, this guy's anti-CBDC. He's all right in my book, right? Now, again, the fact that, one's a central banker, one's a Treasury Secretary, that may sort of muddy the waters a little bit. But it's important to look at these things and say, these are the kinds of people who are going to be, Bessent already in one of the highest cabinet positions there as the Treasury Secretary, replacing Janet Yellen, who was also, was at the Fed before that. She had a very different perspective on Bitcoin, right? But with Warsh saying these things, with Warsh being, he's not coming out and telling people, hey, buy Bitcoin. I forget if he's disclosed if he owns any himself. I would not be surprised if he did. But again, he has not looked at this as something that's, the interviewer specifically asked him about the late Charlie Munger's comments about Bitcoin, and Warren, Charlie Munger's partner, Warren Buffett, obviously, also had very not nice things to say about Bitcoin. I forget which of them called it rat poison squared. I think it was Buffett, but Charlie Munger calling Bitcoin evil. This interviewer is bringing this up, hoping to elicit some sort of a response from Warsh to say, come on, you don't agree with the late, great Charlie Munger? And he's saying, look, no, this isn't something that's evil. This also isn't something that's going away. In the first clip, you saw that he's talking about to Senator Lummis, this is digital assets, Bitcoin being the most important of those, already being integrated into our financial system. This is already a part of things. This isn't something that's theoretical. This isn't something that's coming down the pipe. This is already happening. It's already happened to various degrees in various places, different parts of the financial system. But again, I find all of this very fascinating. I think people should be paying close attention to this because, again, these are the signals that people who are watching closely are looking for. What is this potentially incoming Federal Reserve chair saying about Bitcoin? Bitcoin right now is, under a $2 trillion asset. It's sitting at right now just over $75,000. It's off quite a bit off its recent all-time highs, but it's been moving a little bit lately. It's also been, I believe, kind of the best performing major asset since the start of the Iran war, which tells you something else as well, right? But really, this is about the Overton window shifting. The same thing as what we talked about with Zach Cohen from BPI earlier with regard to four-star Admiral Papero, right? This is about the Overton window shifting. What is the acceptable discourse? What is the acceptable window of discourse for these things? That window now includes Bitcoin very solidly. Now, Bitcoin is not always top of everyone's mind in these conversations like it is for us Bitcoiners, but it's clearly something that they are paying attention to, that they are looking to for in their various capacities, whether you're an admiral or you're a potential Federal Reserve chair or you're the Treasury Secretary or you're the President of the United States, right? I actually think it's more interesting how unelected officials look at these sorts of things because elected ones, well, there's always the chance they're just saying things to try and get your vote, right? For unelected ones, whether it be the Treasury Secretary, whether it be the Federal Reserve Chair, whether it be a four-star admiral, when they say things about Bitcoin, when they speak positively about Bitcoin, when they call Bitcoin a reality, when they don't just dismiss Bitcoin, when they don't disparage Bitcoin, when they don't try to say things like Elizabeth Warren has for years that, basically everybody who uses Bitcoin is just a money laundering criminal terrorist, that's a massive shift. And it's becoming harder and harder for any reasonable person to dismiss Bitcoin. You now have the largest asset managers in the world who are also recommending Bitcoin. We're going to get into a story about BlackRock a little bit later. You've got MicroStrategy continuing to buy Bitcoin. And that actually brings us into our next story here, because the market is reacting to Strategy taking over BlackRock in Bitcoin holdings. This morning, the stock surged to $175 and is now up more than 29% over the past week. MSTR is currently sitting at $166. Now, the catalyst is clear. Strategy just bought another 34,164 BTC, pushing the total holdings to 815,061 Bitcoin and making it the single largest holder in the world, ahead of iShares Bitcoin Trust, BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF. So one corporate treasury now holds more Bitcoin than the biggest Bitcoin ETF on the planet. But the real story here is under the hood. Michael Saylor has spent years refining his capital stack, and STRC is the breakthrough here. It's a perpetual preferred instrument designed to convert global demand for yield directly into Bitcoin accumulation, stripping out the volatility and making it accessible to a much broader investor base. And Saylor isn't shy about the end game. He wants as much of the supply as possible. He even said it himself last year in Abu Dhabi at Bitcoin Mana.
We don't have buyer fatigue. I think that we can buy more Bitcoin than the sellers can sell, and we're going to take it all. And we're going to take it out of circulation. In essence, we're winding up the network. We're powering it up like an engine. It's coiling like a Trojan spring of sorts.
As this chart from River shows, that engine is already dominating flows. Strategy's STRC perpetual preferred stock has driven the purchase of roughly 77,000 Bitcoin so far in 2026, nearly 10 times more than all spot Bitcoin ETFs combined, while ETFs have added just around 8,000 Bitcoin year to date. Strategy alone has accumulated over 140,000 Bitcoin, with STRC acting as the primary fuel. This is a key shift. Instead of waiting for passive inflows, Strategy is actively manufacturing demand through capital markets and converting it into Bitcoin at scale. Roughly 85% of its latest weekly purchase was funded this way, turning digital credit into Bitcoin in real time. Now, as to why viewers at home should care, well, since January 1st, Strategy's Bitcoin stack has grown from 672,500 Bitcoin to 815,061 Bitcoin, meaning the treasury company has bought about 142,561 Bitcoin so far in 2026 alone. Over that same stretch, no pun intended, the Bitcoin network has been issuing about 3.125 Bitcoin per block, or roughly 450 Bitcoin per day after the 2024 halving. Across the first 109 days of the year through April 19th, that works out to just 49,050 newly mined Bitcoin. So Strategy alone has bought nearly 2.9 times more Bitcoin than the entire network has produced this year, absorbing roughly 93,500 Bitcoin more than the fresh supply. This supply shock argument is in plain English here, when one buyer is taking down multiples of new issuance while ETFs, institutions, and long-term holders compete for the same finite float. The market eventually has to reprice higher. STRC makes that dynamic even more powerful. If this machine keeps running, the implication is simple. There are not enough newly mined coins to satisfy demand, and that is how supply shock happens. Now, of course, it's also important to note that there are massive whales out there who have a very, very, very deep pockets, very, very heavy bags of Bitcoin that they are happy to sell. Clearly, the magic number for a lot of whales was $100,000 per coin, especially if they've been holding for a decade or more. The Galaxy whale, you may remember we covered on here with Alex Thorne of Galaxy many months ago now. But they had held Bitcoin since, I believe, 2011. They dumped about 80,000 Bitcoin on the market. So that 80,000 Bitcoin in one dump, that's still more than STRC has accumulated, or that Strategy's accumulated through the STRC vehicle in this entire year so far. And that was one whale. So a lot of people may, call for that there's some sort of market manipulation happening. How is it that when Strategy is buying so much Bitcoin, just Strategy alone, not to mention other Bitcoin treasury companies, not to mention the ETFs, not to mention the small hodlers like you and me out there, my fellow plebs who are just DCAing into Bitcoin, creating that wall of constant demand, which maybe we're not buying in the same size as Saylor, but we're still out there doing our parts. You may be asking, well, how is it possible that number is not going up, right? And it's because there are still sellers, right? There are especially still sellers that have an unfathomably large amount of Bitcoin. that they've held for many, many years. Now you may say, well, why are you selling, hey, Mr. Bitcoin whale, why are you selling your Bitcoin? What are you going to get that's better? Well, who cares? It's their money, right? They can use it how they want. That's the whole point of Bitcoin. And it's just a reality that every time Bitcoin's price goes up, whales start to sell. They also typically tend to accumulate when Bitcoin's price goes down, and short-term holders are panic selling. So again, I've been looking and I've been preaching again and again and again on this show and on my own podcast, the Bitcoin Podcast, for a long time since we started dipping, that look, this is an opportunity for accumulation for us little people down here, right? For us daily DCAers, hourly DCAers, monthly DCAers, for us occasional smash buyers. Bitcoin right now below 100,000 is still a gift. Michael Saylor understands this. It's why he's been accumulating so aggressively. Now, granted, he accumulates aggressively all the time, but you've seen the pace of those accumulations, even with Bitcoin price being still quite high by all things considered. He's been accumulating more and more and more. Over 815,000 Bitcoin now held by MicroStrategy, which is just a shocking amount. You know that he wants to hit that nice round number of 1 million, and presumably he's going to keep going. Now, as the price goes up, which of course it will, I know it doesn't always feel like it, guys, but that's the funny thing about Bitcoin. When you have infinite fiat demand and a completely finite supply of 21 million, number does go up, but it doesn't go up in a straight line, right? It goes up and to the right with volatility forever. Now, it's very easy to get caught up in the day-to-day movements of it, or to get sort of bored to death by the chopsolidation, by the crab market, right? Just moving along range-bound. It's very easy to get lulled into a false sense of security. But I just had a conversation yesterday with James Check on my show, Checkmate. He's got a great publication, Check on Chain. You should go check, no pun intended, go check that out. But one thing that he likes to emphasize is that basically if you miss the 6 to 10 best days of Bitcoin in a year, you basically miss all of the upside to Bitcoin. Meaning Bitcoin does basically all of its upward movement within a handful of days, within maybe 2 handfuls of days throughout the entire year. And this is to the point that unless you are a savant trader, I am certainly not, right? Terrible trader here. Great saver, great hodler. But unless you are a savant trader, you really have no business trying to time the market. With Bitcoin, it is truly the old adage that time in the market beats timing the market is absolutely true. This is why your best strategy for the average person out there, if you're like me and you're just trying to create value for the world, trying to take care of your family, trying to spend time with them, and you don't have time to sit and stare at a chart all day, the best thing that you can possibly do is just DCA Bitcoin, set it, forget about it. When you see Bitcoin dip a little bit, maybe you smash by a bit with whatever spare fiat you have lying around, and you are going to be in great shape. Bitcoin will go up and to the right forever with extreme volatility. Maybe some of that volatility starts getting dampened out, right? We've seen that perhaps a little bit. Maybe we've hit the bottom of this bear. Maybe we haven't. Personally, I don't really care if this has been the bottom. Maybe we touch 58K again. The 58K gang prophecy is once again fulfilled. Everyone can rejoice. Then we can finally go higher. I don't know. Maybe that bottom is already in. It kind of feels like it. But again, I'm no expert on this. But what I do know is that 4 or 5 years from now, I'm not going to care if I was stacking Bitcoin at 75,000 like it is today, if I was stacking it at 85, 95, if I was stacking it at 65, if I was stacking it at 55 even. That's going to be a rounding error in 4 to 5 years' time. And in 8 to 10 years' time, it's going to be a laughable rounding error. It's going to be a blip on the chart that you can't even see unless you zoom in. And I think that that is worth remembering, folks. Up next, BlackRock is reinforcing the long-term Bitcoin thesis, and this time it's coming directly from inside the world's largest asset manager. Jay Jacobs spoke on Fox Business about Bitcoin's role in portfolios. Let's take a look.
Bitcoin in particular is this non-sovereign global decentralized asset that can really provide value to people's portfolios in small doses as a unique asset. Sort of like how gold doesn't behave like stocks or bonds, Bitcoin is driven by its own rules and its own drivers, predominantly, which is greater geopolitical or inflation risk. And frankly, we live in a world where these are prevalent risks around the economy, where people want to hedge that with different assets.
Isn't it interesting? It used to be fringe, and now, thanks very much in part to Larry Fink, your boss, and iShares coming out with the iBit, this is more than 2 years ago now, that it really became this opportunity for people to understand it. Are you saying now that Bitcoin and crypto are long-term investments?
I think you have to look at it through a long-term lens because it's volatile. Because we see over weeks, months, it can be up and down. People are still trying to figure out what the value of this asset is. But if you zoom out and take a long-term view of the role it can play in a portfolio, it can really be one of those diversifiers that behaves unique from stocks and bonds.
Jacob says Bitcoin shouldn't be judged on short-term price moves or assigned a fixed valuation model. Its value is driven by demand for an asset outside traditional financial systems. He points to persistent global debt expansion, ongoing currency debasement, and rising cross-border capital demand as the real forces behind Bitcoin's growth. And the flows back that up. BlackRock's iShares Bitcoin Trust, IBIT, has rapidly become one of the most successful ETF launches in history. As of April 2026, IBIT holds roughly 800,000 Bitcoin, making it one of the largest single holders globally. As we heard now, has just been surpassed by Michael Saylor's strategy, though. The fund has seen tens of billions in net inflows, with multiple days crossing $500 million plus in daily demand during peak accumulation periods. That kind of sustained bid is not retail hype. It's institutional capital allocating at scale. At the same time, Michael Saylor's strategy has now surpassed BlackRock's holdings, signaling a growing race among institutions to secure Bitcoin supply. Now, as to why this matters, BlackRock isn't just offering exposure. They are now validating the thesis. Bitcoin is being positioned as a long-term financial infrastructure tied to macro instability and dollar debasement. And this is just, it's so interesting to see how far BlackRock has come with this, right? How far Larry Fink himself has come from being a complete Bitcoin skeptic or even vocally anti-Bitcoin to becoming one of Bitcoin's biggest champions. And look at that, it is incredibly profitable for BlackRock. You know, one of the most successful or the most successful ETF launch in history, right? Go figure, folks who cannot open a PDF want to buy the Bitcoin ETF, and you can't blame them, right? Personally, I like to hold my Bitcoin in cold storage, in self-custody, in distributed multi-sig. But you know what? That's just not going to be what works for your Uncle Bob, who again can't open a PDF. So to each their own, and to institutional players, they're looking for this kind of stamp of approval of BlackRock, right? This is what they're used to. This is the water they're used to swimming in. But I want to double tap briefly on a couple of things that Jacob said there. One, he basically talked about the geopolitical and the inflation risk, right? Speaking of this again with Bitcoin as a long-term opportunity. So he's not talking about playing short-term market moves. He's not talking about week to week, day to day, week to week, month to month inflation or geopolitical risk. He's framing Bitcoin in the long term. It's not a short-term play. It's a long-term play. I think Bitcoiners agree with that, right? This is what Bitcoiners have been saying for a long time. But that framing coming from an asset manager like BlackRock is incredibly important and incredibly powerful. A bunch of anonymous Bitcoiners can shout about the exact same things on X, and it's not going to matter to most people, sadly. It matters to a lot of other Bitcoiners, right? Maybe it changes a few minds, but it doesn't really matter to a lot of the average person or the average capital allocator who, like it or not, wants to hear from the likes of suits at BlackRock or any of the, name any of these other big financial institutions that have now launched Bitcoin, Bitcoin ETFs or other Bitcoin products. They want to hear from those type of folks. They want to be sort of, convinced that, look, this is a good thing. This is safe. We're recommending it. And, if we recommend it, it's got to be, it's got our BlackRock stamp of approval. That may not matter to you or to me, but it matters to a lot of people. That's the reality of it. And again, this really just ties into this larger theme of the Overton window around Bitcoin shifting. In the first hour, we talked with Zach Cohen of BPI about 4-star Admiral Popero, speaking very positively about Bitcoin in terms of its national security implications, right? You've heard as well, these different asset managers speaking very positively about Bitcoin in terms of its long-term thesis, right? Not just short-term speculation, long-term savings and investment. You also heard about Kevin Warsh, the potentially incoming Federal Reserve Chair, talking about Bitcoin as a bit of a canary in a coal mine, a bit of a warning, a way to figure out if there are things wrong with the financial system, a bit of an indicator, if you will, a barometer for this. And I think all of these things, whether it be politicians, sure, they'll say whatever, whatever gets them elected and gets them more campaign dollars. But when it comes to asset managers like BlackRock, they're saying this, of course, because they're talking their book. Bitcoin is now part of their book, though. They now benefit by speaking positively about Bitcoin. They make money when more people decide they want to invest in Bitcoin and want to do it through BlackRock, right? Kevin Warsh also talking about Bitcoin in a very positive light. Admiral Popro talking about Bitcoin in a very positive light, all from very different perspectives, right? One from the corporate private sector side in terms of BlackRock speaking about Bitcoin as a long-term investment vehicle, a hedge against geopolitical uncertainty, a hedge against inflation and currency debasement, rapid debt expansion. One on the sort of government, fiscal side of things, or government monetary side of things, I should say, with Warsh potentially going to the Federal Reserve. The other one on the military side of things from within the government, talking about Bitcoin and its strategic implications for national security, talking about the POW network, the proof of work network, talking about Bitcoin in a very different way. All of them are talking about Bitcoin in a very different way. It means different things to different people, right? But the point is that now Bitcoin is fully within all of their individual Overton windows, and it's within the more broad global Overton window, right? As the Admiral said, Bitcoin is a reality. And I think that's a great way of saying it. Like, Bitcoin is a reality. It is here to stay. It's not going away. You can't ignore it. I mean, you can ignore it, but only, the only person who's going to be hurt by you ignoring it is yourself. And I think that goes for politicians, policymakers. That goes for anyone in the corporate world. That goes for anyone in the military, whether it's the U.S. military or other militaries around the world. That also goes for, the people that are large asset managers. You've seen a lot of people bending the knee to Bitcoin. A lot of these asset managers who had previously said a lot of negative things about Bitcoin coming around to it, especially as they realize they can make more money off it, is right. That's the pretty obvious reason, but also because perhaps they've finally just admitted to themselves the reality that Bitcoin is here to stay. Bitcoin is not going away. And Bitcoin is fundamentally creating a paradigm shift in how we view money, how we view savings, how we view investment. And lest we forget, outside of Bitcoin just as an asset that has a number go up, Bitcoin also has the freedom go up component, right? Nobody can take this away from you. Now, if they hold it in a Bitcoin ETF, that's a different story, right? Again, that's why you should get Bitcoin, real Bitcoin, spot Bitcoin, hold it in self-custody, put it in cold storage, keep it secret, keep it safe, right? Nobody can take that away from you. You can also send it. Bitcoin is not just a store of value. It is a medium of exchange as well, and a damn good one. Not just at the base layer where you have the highest amount of security and finality in terms of the medium of exchange, but also on all of the layer 2s, 3s, and 4s, et cetera, that are being built on top of Bitcoin. There are trade-offs at each of those layers. Of course, you're maybe gaining some speed, you're sacrificing a little security, whatever it may be. But the point is that Bitcoin is freedom money in so many ways. It's not just freedom because it frees you from the pressures of currency debasement, the pressures of inflation, the potential danger of having your bank account frozen, your money confiscated, but also because you can send it anywhere to anyone in the world, 24/7, 365, and nobody can stop you. That is incredibly, incredibly powerful. The political pendulum always swings back and forth and back and forth. The current administration has been quite friendly to Bitcoin. That may not last, right? And depending where you are in the world, you may not have politicians that are friendly toward Bitcoin at all. Or you may have politicians that, if you're in El Salvador, that are incredibly friendly towards Bitcoin and have been for some time, that are already living in the future a little bit more than many other nations, despite their small size. And so, I would remind people that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. And I think that applies to Bitcoin in a very meaningful way, right? You can already be living in a Bitcoin future, right? All that you have to do is get yourself some Bitcoin, and you've accumulated enough Bitcoin, put that into some cold storage, put that in a hardware wallet, take control of your own keys. If he who holds the keys holds the coins, that can be you. Nobody can take that. Nobody can confiscate it. That is a powerful tool, right? But then also use Bitcoin as money, right? The great way to do that is just by going on Nostr. You can send and receive zaps for your shit posts and your memes or your articles or your videos, your vlogs, whatever it may be. And you can use Bitcoin as money in a very fun and casual way every single day. I know I sure like doing it. Or you don't have to do whatever you want with your money. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not the government, right? But again, I think the one thing I want you to take away from this is just the massive shift in the narrative, the massive shift in the Overton window, the capitulation from many previous skeptics or areas of government that were previously skeptical or areas of finance that were previously skeptical. we're seeing a shift here. And if you're listening to this, if you're paying attention to it, you're probably already stacking Bitcoin, and you're probably trying to accumulate as much as you possibly can. Because like Michael Saylor, again, even though you're not accumulating in such size, I'm certainly not, nobody really is, but it's still the same thesis, right? Bitcoin is a reality, as the Admiral said. It is here to stay. It is not going away. There is a finite pie, right? 21 million Bitcoin. That is all that will ever exist. It is a race to try and accumulate as much of that finite pie as you possibly can. The clock is ticking, but you still, got some time. I'm not trying to give you this urgency thing that if you don't buy it today, you're going to be screwed. You can buy Bitcoin whenever you want, or don't buy it at all. That leaves more for the rest of us. But if you're listening to me here on RoxomTV, I have a feeling that you are doing some stacking. And so you're already living in the future, right? Most of the world still does not own Bitcoin. Even if the people that own it, most of them don't even understand what they hold, right? That's why you have a lot of short-term panic sellers, because people just don't get it yet. So if you do get it, and you are aware, and you are stacking, and you're also spending and replacing that Bitcoin, you're using this as a medium of exchange too. If you start to actually use it as a unit of account, as the third step, to actually think about the value that you create and the money that you spend priced in Bitcoin, that's a whole nother mentality shift. Maybe you're there yet, maybe you're not. It's a different ballgame though once you start pricing the world in Bitcoin. And you see a lot of decisions get a heck of a lot easier. But that's enough ranting for me for now. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with more stories, more Bitcoin stories, but also more world news stories here on RoxomTV. So we'll take a quick break. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back here in just a moment.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
How about stretch preferred stock on Roxom? Receive 11.5% monthly cash dividends paid in Bitcoin.
11.5% paid in Bitcoin? How is that possible?
It's real. Stretch dividends on Roxom gives 11.5% monthly cash dividends paid in Bitcoin.
Dang! I want everyone pitching Roxom to your clients. Corporate traders, asset managers, old, young, Stretch on Roxom is for everyone.
Now that's a birthday gift. 11.5% in Bitcoin.
We are in heaven at 11.5. 11.5%. 11.5%.
Oh, I forgot to mention, dividends on Roxom are paid in Bitcoin. Stretch your income, 11.5% paid in Bitcoin.
Stretch your income to 11.5, get 11.5 in Bitcoin and Roxom. 11.5%. 11.5%.
Welcome back to RoxomTV. My name is Walker America. The price of Bitcoin is 75,514 infinitely printable Federal Reserve notes per coin. And we're going to get into our next batch of stories here on RoxomTV. Because $12 trillion giant Charles Schwab just released a Bitcoin education video as it prepares to launch direct trading to its 38.9 million brokerage accounts. Take a look.
Because they're so volatile, even small amounts could translate to much larger levels of risk. Let's look at a quick hypothetical example using Bitcoin. A theoretical investor with a moderate risk appetite might split a traditional portfolio 60-40, 60% stocks and 40% bonds. Stocks consist of almost 100% of the risk in that portfolio because they're far more volatile. If that investor decides to add an even more unruly asset like Bitcoin, they might only want Bitcoin to make up 10% of the portfolio's risk. According to the Schwab Center for Financial Research, that investor might want to invest no more than 2.7% of their total portfolio in Bitcoin. An aggressive investor, say they typically put 96% of their portfolio in stocks, might be comfortable with 20% of the portfolio's risk in Bitcoin.
Apologies for the technical difficulties there, guys. So here's the bigger story, though. Schwab is putting a Bitcoin buy button inside the same accounts where Americans already hold their stocks, ETFs, and retirement savings. That's more than $12 trillion in client assets, now one click away from direct Bitcoin exposure. Schwab Crypto is rolling out through 2026. For now, it's just buy and sell. Bitcoin is held in custody, not in a wallet you control. No confirmation yet on withdrawals or self-custody. And Schwab is already signaling how Bitcoin fits into portfolios. Their internal research points to allocations as high as 8.8% for aggressive investors, framing Bitcoin not as speculation, but as part of modern portfolio construction. Zoom out. BlackRock opened the floodgates with ETFs. Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs are building out Bitcoin products across their platforms. Now Schwab brings that access directly to the retail investor. This is a big deal. Schwab has almost 40 million active brokerage accounts, and leadership is now actively building around Bitcoin demand. We are truly still early, though. And again, this fits in this larger narrative of the sort of capitulation from the traditional finance world and just acknowledgement of reality and shifting of this Overton window around Bitcoin. It's not just some fringe asset anymore. It's not just magic internet money for magic internet money nerds, right? This is something that should be a part, as you're hearing from the guys at Schwab, and there's been other research now going back for years showing, hey, just a 1 to 2% Bitcoin allocation creates these massive outsized returns for you versus the traditional portfolio split of the old 60-40 portfolio. I don't know anyone in my generation who actually owns bonds, but apparently a lot of boomers still do. But again, this, as the story laid out here, this isn't self-custody Bitcoin, right? There are obvious risks to this, right? The true benefits are lost if a trusted third party is still required, to quote Satoshi. But this is still just an important development in terms of the institutional acceptance of Bitcoin and what it means for at least more and more people getting exposure to Bitcoin. Now, whether or not all of those people who end up getting exposure to Bitcoin through Schwab end up eventually going deeper down the rabbit hole, taking Bitcoin into self-custody, going into all the other facets of the Bitcoin rabbit hole that many of us who have been studying it for a while have now gone down and continue to realize there's even more pathways leading off it. But even if just a few do, I think that's a win. Even if just a few people end up going and initially getting some Bitcoin with Schwab, and then later on going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole more, realizing, hey, I don't need them. Actually, I can hold this in my own self-custody. I can have this. I can take this around the world with me in my head. This is a really powerful thing. Even if just a few people end up going deeper down that rabbit hole, I think that is a huge win. One of the main reason that I have a Bitcoin podcast, that I talk about Bitcoin here on Roxom, that I talk about Bitcoin to friends and family when they still listen, and haven't just completely shut me out. But I've brought orange pilled a decent number of people in the meat space. But the reason that I do that is because I want as many normal people as possible, normal people as possible. I don't know how normal I am, but as many just average people as possible to own Bitcoin, not because it pumps my bags. A friend buying a few dollars worth of Bitcoin does not move the needle at all. I want the people that I care about, the people that I love, and also random strangers to own Bitcoin because it is going to be good for them, because it is the best thing you can possibly own, not just as a number go up asset, right? Not just as an investment in your portfolio, in your modern portfolio allocation, but as a way to actually get back to saving in money itself. We haven't been able to save in money itself in a long time. Fiat kind of broke that. People don't save for the future by leaving money sitting in a bank account, earning a fraction of a percent, a couple bips in interest, right? That's not how you save for the future. People invest their fiat into various assets, stocks or bonds, I guess, if you're a boomer. But people invest their money. They have to invest so much, or in real estate as proxies for stores of value, because our money itself is not a store of value anymore. And again, that's the key problem, right? You can't save in fiat money itself. I mean, you can if you want the value of those savings to be eroded by inflation. Like the fiats can be used for short-term stuff, but it's a very, very, very bad store of value over any meaningfully long time horizon, right? That's why people dump money into real estate. That's why people dump so much money into the stock market. That's why people have gone away from actually keeping anything beyond just some, emergency cash available. It's because saving in fiat it's not really possible. You can't save in it anymore. You can hold a little bit for what you need in the short term. But if you hold fiat for the long term, if you put fiat under your mattress, well, that fiat's going to be worth a heck of a lot less in terms of real purchasing power when you finally pull it out from underneath your bed sheets, And that's the key point here, is that Bitcoin is actually a return to saving in money itself. And that is, I think, the piece that is still very much a niche piece of understanding, right? Even with all these shifts in the Overton window that we're seeing, even with the folks at Schwab, BlackRock, whatever it may be, any of these large multi-trillion-dollar asset managers, even they are just still talking about Bitcoin as part, just another asset in your, your well-balanced portfolio that's constructed to be able to, with an appropriate level of risk tolerance for you at the particular point that you're at in your life's journey. And, but it's so much more than that, right? It's such a deeper, more fundamental change. Not only does it allow you to actually save in money itself, again, not a proxy, but save in money itself, but it also has so many other benefits, which I just discussed previously, and which if you've been listening to the show, you already know about, but it is more than just a store of value, right? It is a censorship-resistant, unconfiscatable medium of exchange as well, and that too is powerful. Now, the Overton window is not there yet, right? The Overton window is still Bitcoin as a store of value, Bitcoin as part of modern portfolio construction for any prudent investor who wants to better manage their risk and potentially increase the upside potential that their portfolio has, right? That's where the Overton window is still at. But you can see there's other parts of that are shifting. We're hearing these admirals that we mentioned earlier, Admiral Popper, talk about Bitcoin and its national strategic importance. So we're talking about Kevin Warsh earlier, the potential Federal Reserve Chair, talking about Bitcoin as this signal for when there's something going wrong in the markets. So the Overton window is shifting. It's shifting slowly, but it's, not too slowly. Things are happening gradually, then suddenly. And as we see more and more and more of these traditional asset managers sort of bend the knee and realize, wow, well, we looked at the numbers and it turns out what the Bitcoin guys were saying was right. But hey, now we can make money off of this, so we're all for it. Right? I don't have an account with Schwab, but that's ultimately what I care about. Control their own keys, of course. But that's also it's not going to be for everyone, right? Not everyone's going to self-custody Bitcoin. Not everybody's going to embrace this cypherpunk ethos, right? Not everybody's going to want to subvert the state through monetary and other freedom technologies, right? And that's okay. Bitcoin doesn't need everyone on the entire planet to self-custody Bitcoin to win. That's not even possible in terms of the UTXO set. That's a whole different technical conversation. But what is a good thing, an undeniably good thing, is more and more people getting exposure to Bitcoin, because also getting exposure to Bitcoin, just having a little bit in that portfolio, watching that number go up, it's the best marketing that Bitcoin has. People seeing themselves get wealthier, right, because of Bitcoin. That creates more and more people who are now no longer just ambivalent or maybe outright hostile to Bitcoin, but are on the side of Bitcoin, saying, well, I didn't know much about Bitcoin, but then my investment advisor said that I should get a little allocation of 2.7% through Schwab, and now I like Bitcoin because Bitcoin just increased my portfolio returns by whatever percent in the past 4 years. That creates more and more people who are on the side of Bitcoin, more potential champions for Bitcoin, fewer potential hostile attackers of Bitcoin in terms of whether it be at the government level or whether it be at just the individual level. And I think that is ultimately a really, really positive thing. We're going to jump into our next story here because French prosecutors are summoning Elon Musk to Paris for a, quote, voluntary interview as part of a cybercrime investigation into X. The probe centers on allegations that X allowed child sexual abuse material and AI-generated deepfakes to spread on the platform. Musk hasn't confirmed he will show up. French prosecutors allege X's AI system Grok and its deepfakes was deliberately manufactured to boost Musk's company valuations ahead of the planned June 2026 stock market listing of the merged SpaceX and XAI entity. President Trump's DOJ has sent French authorities a letter saying it would not assist the investigation, calling France's requests, quote, an effort to entangle the United States in a politically charged criminal proceeding. Now, this is interesting. We're going to see more and more of this kind of stuff happening. We've already seen this happening on more of the, let's say, the free speech side of things or lack thereof in places like the UK or Australia. But you've seen, the UK courts try to basically go after the likes of 4chan and other similar companies, that are based in the US, have no business overseas. But it turns out, the internet is a global thing, right? And you see a lot of these. Preston Byrne, he's an attorney, and he's been doing incredible work for on behalf of 4chan and on behalf of all U.S. companies. I had a conversation with him at the end of this last year that was fascinating. But we're going to see more of this clash between physical, land-based, real meat space world powers and the open or relatively open global internet and companies that are operating purely as internet businesses, right? They may be headquartered in the United States, but of course, people can access them anywhere around the world as long as they're not blocked by their ISP or firewalled by their government from doing so. And so I think you're going to see this trend accelerate more and more here in the months and years to come. I think that it's, basically at the end of the day, you're going to see countries go one of two ways, right? They're going to go the way of freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, or they're going to go the exact opposite way of that. The freedom comes in many shapes and sizes. In the UK, they have some interesting views on it. But this next story is about the UK, but has nothing to do with the internet for once here. Because a bill in the UK that bans shops from ever selling tobacco to anyone born on or after 2009 is one step closer to becoming law. That means today's 16-year-olds will never legally be able to buy a cigarette. Not now, not when they turn 18, not ever. The age limit rises by 1 year every year, permanently locking them out. The bill also introduces flavor bans and plain packaging rules for vapes, which have surged among school-age children. If it passes, it will become law in 2027. The government is calling it the biggest public health intervention in a generation. Critics call it prohibitionist. Now, if there's one thing that I think history has taught us, it's that the government trying to prevent people from doing something that they want to do generally just ends up in people finding roundabout ways to still do that thing. You look at the prohibition in the United States, in the last century. You look at the war on drugs. Any of these things, people, when they want to do something, they will find a way to do it, even if it's something that's not necessarily good for your health. And also, it raises the larger question of how much role should the government actually have in that, right? Like what, and you're saying, okay, will people not be able to still get cigarettes at all? Like cigarettes are bad. Maybe we should just ban them. It's like, you can believe that, but when you hand power off to the government to do any of these things, ultimately it just always increases the power of the state, right? The government, once they take a certain power to do something, never really gives it back for the most part. And so, yeah, you can say, well, people shouldn't be smoking cigarettes at all. Yeah, but you know what? People should just be able to kind of do what they want, right? Also, like, boy, it's a little bit ironic that it's like, hey, in the UK, you can go ahead and be a child and get gender, reassignment surgery and, have body parts chopped off. But no, smoking a cigarette, no. Sorry, that is a bridge too far. Heaven forbid, right? I mean, it's also like, okay, well, then like go out there and ban sugar as well. Ban these other things. I mean, in America, it's like, yeah, we demonized cigarettes. And again, I'm not coming out on behalf of the tobacco industry here. More so just that, we banned or made it very, very inconvenient to smoke cigarettes, very much demonized cigarettes. At the same time, you got like the sugar lobby, who is, just, going gangbusters, doing an attack on any sort of fats, natural animal fats, and pumping people full of all sorts of processed sugar and things like that. We now have, more people in America are overweight or obese than are not. That is just insane. And it's like, maybe it would have been a lot better off for people to just smoke cigarettes and eat a little bit less. But hey, again, government intervention, this is an example of like, okay, yeah, we want to keep people healthy. We don't want as many people smoking cigarettes. Okay, there are always going to be other consequences. Also, people will find a way. I don't know. I'd be interested to see if this passes. The UK is an interesting place these days. It is very, very fascinating to see what governments focus on prohibiting and what they do not. There are a lot of things going on in the UK that you would think would be a higher priority than stopping, protecting kids from smoking. Like, I don't know, just like protecting kids from rape gangs, for example, which the UK seems to have a bit of a problem doing. But I digress. Clearly, they have their priorities straight. Ban kids from social media and don't let them ever smoke cigarettes. But hey, if, they happen to get raped, well, that's just, that's not a problem the UK wants to deal with. But I digress. Thankfully, I live in the United States of America where I can say things like that, and not in the UK where I would probably be thrown in jail for such a heinous opinion like that. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be right back here on Roxom TV with more. We've also got guest Stephen Orr is going to be joining us at the top of the next hour, so you won't want to miss that. So stay tuned. Don't touch that dial. We will be right back here on Roxom TV with more in just a moment.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
How about stretch preferred stock on Roxom? Receive 11.5% monthly cash dividends paid in Bitcoin.
11.5% paid in Bitcoin? How is that possible?
It's real. Stretch dividends on Roxom gives 11.5% monthly cash dividends paid in Bitcoin.
Dang! I want everyone pitching Roxom to your clients. Corporate tracers, asset managers, old, young, Stretch on Roxom is for everyone.
Now that's a birthday gift. 11.5% in Bitcoin.
We are in heaven at 11.5. 11.5%. 11.5%.
Oh, I forgot to mention, dividends on Roxom are paid in Bitcoin. Stretch your income, 11.5% paid in Bitcoin.
Stretch your income to 11.5, get 11.5 in Bitcoin and Roxom. 11.5%. 11.5%.
Welcome back to RoxomTV. My name is Walker America, and Apple's Tim Cook is stepping down as CEO. Last night, Apple announced his last day will be August 31st. Taking over is John Ternus, Apple's current head of hardware engineering. Ternus is a 25-year Apple veteran who has overseen generations of the iPhone, Mac, iPad, AirPods, and Apple Watch. Cook will stay on as executive chairman. Ternus has some big shoes to fill because the numbers under Cook are staggering. He took over from Steve Jobs in 2011 with Apple worth roughly $350 billion. It closes today at $4 trillion. Revenue nearly quadrupled on his watch, which is perhaps why Apple's stock is down about 0.5% this morning on the news. Ternus inherits a company facing real headwinds, a lagging AI strategy, tariff exposure, supply chain complexity, and the challenge of pushing Siri into a world now dominated by ChatGPT and Gemini. His first major test, Apple reports earnings on April 30th. Maybe just a note on this from my side. It is, the numbers do tell a very impressive story in terms of Apple's growth here. But then, what you always kind of see around this whenever Tim Cook is brought up from a CEO perspective is like the lack of the visionary side of things, right? This is what Steve Jobs was known for, like all of these, they brought about the AirPods more recently and the Apple Watch and things like that. But, the iPhone itself, yeah, they've added new bells and whistles. Yes, it's gotten sleeker. Yes, it's, gotten faster. But it's like lack of really new groundbreaking things, I think. And, more so just the, I guess the focus, which should be any company's focus, who has shareholders, of course, but, on just basically making them more attractive to potential investors without actually doing things that are really inspiring anymore. I think that's what people, miss most about Steve Jobs is sort of that visionary quality that he had. And obviously he was quite a hard ass. But, the guy sure did bring a lot of incredible and revolutionary products to market. And Apple has been, roughly, kind of coasting on a lot of those coattails since then. But still, they are worth a heck of a lot of money. One can only wonder if they will eventually decide to add some Bitcoin exposure to their balance sheet. They are certainly behind the times in terms of, they have had Siri for a long time. But Siri has kind of stagnated. It's gotten a little bit better in some recent releases, but just in terms of how quickly, ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, Claude, Grok have been able to just dominate and become such powerful tools. And then you sort of have Apple that's, basically had a head start on the sort of, AI assistant side of things, and then really kind of fell by the wayside and has been really eclipsed by these other companies, these other, AI-based technologies. And so I find that quite interesting. It's also going to be interesting to have he was running the hardware engineering side of things, Ternus was. It's going to be interesting to have that kind of perspective. Maybe you start getting more into real developments, real breakthroughs on the hardware side of things, new focuses than Tim Cook had. So let's see. I think it'll be interesting. I have got my MacBook here. I've got my my AirPods in my ears. I've got my iPhone right here. Apple is a force to be reckoned with, and they do make damn good products. It'll be interesting to see, what's the next generation of those, and also, on the hardware side, but then on the software side, can they sort of catch up to some of these other AI players in terms of what capabilities they enable for Siri or for anything else they develop. So we'll be watching it closely here on RoxomTV. We are going to take a quick break, though. When we come back, we'll hit another story and just a markets update. And then we're going to have a guest, Stephen Orr. He's the CEO and founder of Quasar Markets. Stephen will be joining us when we come back here on RoxomTV. So again, just a quick break, folks. Don't touch that dial. We will be right back here on RoxomTV to round out the final hour of this 3-hour marathon here. And I will see you soon. Stay tuned.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
No! Bitcoin! Come on, little buddy! Bitcoin! I need you! Don't go!
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
How about Stretch preferred stock on Roxom? Receive 11.5% monthly cash dividends paid in Bitcoin.
11.5% paid in Bitcoin? How is that possible?
It's real. Stretch dividends on Roxom gives 11.5% monthly cash dividends paid in Bitcoin.
Dang! I want everyone pitching Roxom to your clients. Corporate traders, asset managers, old, young, Stretch on Roxom is for everyone.
Now that's a birthday gift. 11.5% in Bitcoin.
11.5. We are in heaven at 11.5. 11.5%. 11.5%.
Welcome back to RoxomTV. The price of Bitcoin is $75,741 infinitely printable Federal Reserve notes per coin. And today, futures markets are edging higher after this morning, and oil is falling on signals that both the U.S. and Iran are sending teams to Islamabad. Monday told a different story. The S&P and NASDAQ both closed down over 0.2%, snapping the NASDAQ's 13-day winning streak, its longest since 1992, as the Tuska seizure and Iran's drone claims rattled sentiment. United Health is a standout this morning, surging 6% after blowing past earnings expectations. On the downside, Apple is slipping 0.5% after the company announced Tim Cook is stepping down as the CEO effective September 1st, handing the role to hardware engineering head John Turnus. And the Kevin Warsh confirmation hearings kicked off at 10 a.m. Markets are watching for any signal on the Fed's direction on rates. The ceasefire expires tonight. Everything moves on Iran. Next, I'd like to bring in Stephen Orr. Stephen is the CEO and founder of Quasar Markets to get his take on things. Stephen, how you doing today? Absolutely. Pleasure to have you. So what are you watching right now? I've been a little bit out of the loop for a couple of weeks actually, and I'm coming back. A lot has changed, a lot has stayed the same. What have you been paying attention to? What's the signal amidst the noise that you're keying in on?
Yeah, I think it's very simple. There's two things I'm really keying on. That's the dollar, the Dixie, and I'm also keying in on oil itself, mainly because it's on and again, off again with Iran, and Pakistan is really kind of calling the shots from the Islamabad side, whether or not they can get Iran to the table. And, one of the things I'm very interested in is where Saudi Arabia is, because, with OPEC sitting on the sidelines, Saudi Arabia's been kind of quiet on this whole situation with the Strait of Hormuz, right? And so you also have to look at cryptocurrency, because crypto is the risk-on kind of asset lately that's been looking at it. And I think I told my own team today, I have 18 screens and I've got 29 AIs running, Walker, and I'm sitting on my hands today. I traded oil a little bit, crushed it both ways today, and a few GameStop feeling stocks like Avis Car Rental, CAR, and crushed that one this morning. But I really cannot find general direction, because I think people are unhappy right now in the markets, and that's the general malaise that we're finding right now.
What do you think that unhappiness stems from broadly? Because obviously, if we're looking at the Bitcoin side of things, Bitcoin has, recently it's performed very well since the start of the war versus other major asset classes. Over the past year, not so much versus those same asset classes. But I think you're talking about a more broader malaise across markets, across asset classes. What do you think is driving that? Is it just uncertainty in terms of the war side of things? Is it something else? What's your read?
I think it's all the above. I feel like when I'm, kind of taking a test, A, B, C, and a D, all the above, and that D, all the above says AI is also really a factor with a lot of people in their jobs, or worried about their jobs. I think number two is inflation has really hit a lot of economies. I asked earlier the question, what percentage of Americans right now are sitting with $500 or less in their accounts, cash-wise, and that's 60%. Whether that's got the money in Robinhood or crypto or whatever, that's not a good buffer, right? And I think the third thing is they're all worried about is the actual election coming up. They're worried about who they're voting for, and the midterms are coming up, and the summer's coming up. What do I do? And I think the old adage, sell in May and go away, is starting to hit home for a lot of people.
How much do you think, I was just talking about with an analyst about this yesterday, the whole, does the sell in May go away? Is it just a self-fulfilling prophecy, sort of, because it is such an old adage, because it is, kind of like it's a trope, but it's like a trope for a reason. I mean, is that a self-fulfilling prophecy there? Like, do people just plan on that, and because everybody is planning on it, it happens, but then is it already just priced in because everyone is planning on it? What's your take?
That's a good question, Walker. Yes and no. I mean, yes, because it's an old adage, right? And it's also right after April 15th, and people are tired of trading. They've just spent a whole bunch of money, and they know they got to save some money up for summer vacation, whatever they're going to go do. And also, it's the summertime, right? They don't want to be stuck behind a computer screen all day long. Now, that's changed a little bit, because now it's all in our hands with a mobile phone, right? But when you look at the future, and you think about the trading now is 24/7 with crypto, you think about 24/5 in stocks. Right now, I think that the sell in May might be a little bit premature, because right now there is this whole thing around oil and whether or not, and if I were to add the other adage, which is Dow theory, right? If it moves, it burns, oil and gas. Right now, that's a big question mark around airplanes. Plane tickets are going through the roof, if not cutting your route. So your summer vacation might be getting cut short, or changes to how you get on that plane, or taxis getting there, or Uber costs are going to go up because of gasoline prices. That's a lot of malaise that people are really unhappy with, and really don't know what to do with right now.
Yeah, it certainly is always interesting around midterm season and just, election cycles in general. Because obviously, whether or not the economy is perceived as doing well is a huge factor in how people react, in whether they vote for the party that is currently in power or not. Obviously, some people are going to vote one way or another either way. There's no change in their mind. But there are a lot of folks, I think an increasing number, who are kind of in the middle, and they will just sort of vote with their gut in terms of how they feel the economy is doing for them. And I mean, do you think, right now, even with, a lot of assets have had pretty good runs here. Bitcoin only kind of recently started to do some catching up there. But I mean, it would seem like a lot of people would be fairly happy with how things are going. But I would think, and I think this is kind of your contention here as well, just the obviously the pain of inflation, it never subsides, right? It's like, oh, it may be a little bit year over year. Sure, inflation went down, but inflation never goes down, right? Everything's getting more expensive forever. And whether or not there's people, well, the CPI print was, a little bit lower. It's like, nobody cares. What they care about is my money is buying me less and less and less every year. But the problem is that most people don't seem to realize that there's not a politician that's really going to fix that unless they do some very drastic things. I think there's a little bit of, people wishing for something that's not going to happen. There's bipartisan support for printing money. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I'm wearing my orange shirt today. I've been orange pilled a long time ago, Walker. I know how to beat that inflation, and that's it's crypto and Bitcoin for me, right? And investing in Bitcoin longer term, and you're seeing that now with some of the flip side of the banks, right? They've gone from no, we hate it to oh my gosh, we're going to embrace it to oh my god, we've got to have an ETF to oh my, I gotta start owning it ourselves. That's a big turn than we saw 15 years ago. And you're seeing now that change, but you're also seeing that change in the average citizen now also going, you know what, I need to own some of this. But it's also being seen internationally too. When you see this international angst amongst oil, and you see it amongst the Strait of Hormuz, and they're flipping out their gold. They're flipping out their stocks. They're saying, look, I want to take some profit off here and maybe put some into Bitcoin. And we saw that, right? You see oil dropping, Bitcoin goes up. We know where that's going to, right? They don't want to put that in the sideline. Right now, there's $7.9 trillion in money market money. That's a lot of cash in the sidelines that hasn't been put to good use yet. And that's also coming in. That means the institutions are going to do something with that money. They don't want to sit at the end of the next quarter going, hey, I did nothing with that. And guess what they're doing with it? They're buying Bitcoin. So whether or not the retailer is buying it, the sailors are buying it, BlackRock's buying it. You're seeing Goldman Sachs buying more of it. Why is a retailer not participating? And I think they are. They're just a little bit more hesitant than they had been in the past.
No, it's fair. And one thing I want to that leads us well into our next story is just sort of what you talked about in terms of changing perceptions around these things, right? The Overton window has definitely shifted, whether it be asset managers, managing, multi-trillion dollars worth of assets, or whether it's even, incoming Federal Reserve chairs. And I'm going to run into one of these next stories we have here, and I'd love your take on it because Kevin Warsh, which is Trump's pick to replace Jerome Powell as Fed chair, testified before the Senate Banking Committee today. When he was asked by Senator Cynthia Lummis on his views on digital assets, he had quite an interesting answer. Let's go ahead and watch.
That digital assets should be incorporated into our financial industry so Americans have new investment opportunities and consumer protections.
Senator, digital assets are already part of the fabric of our financial services industry in the United States. Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Walsh.
Senator.
So what stood out here wasn't just this exchange itself, but the framing. There was no dismissal, just a clear acknowledgement that digital assets are already part of the U.S. financial system. And that tracks well with Warsh's history. Kevin Warsh has been one of the few Fed chair contenders willing to speak about Bitcoin without the usual skepticism. In prior interviews, he pushed back on the condescension toward buyers, arguing Bitcoin can impose discipline on policymakers, not a replacement for the dollar, but a signal when policy goes off track.
You made reference to Bitcoin, and I thought I heard a little bit of condescension that people are buying Bitcoin and these things.
But doesn't it, Charlie Munger, this is 2 or 3 years before he died, Charlie Munger attacked Bitcoin. He called it evil, in part because it would begin to undermine the Fed's ability to manage the economy.
Or it could provide market discipline. Or it could tell the world that things need to be fixed.
Bitcoin does not make you nervous.
Bitcoin does not make me nervous.
Today, he weighed in on central bank digital currencies as well, drawing a clear line against the Fed moving in that direction.
Currencies. Do you agree that the Federal Reserve has no legal right to issue a central bank digital currency?
Senator, I agree that they don't have the right, and I think it would be a bad policy choice.
Somebody just put an exclamation mark on that. Under your chairmanship of the Federal Reserve, you will not have the Federal Reserve explore or any way move towards a central bank digital currency.
If it's within the power of the chairman of the Federal Reserve, I agree with that statement.
If Warsh gets confirmed, markets will read it as a signal about the next regime at the Fed. Rates, liquidity, and the broader stance toward alternative assets could all shift. And for Bitcoin, the signal is subtle but important. Warsh doesn't frame it as something to shut down. He treats it more like a warning system, a market check on bad monetary policy. I'd like to bring back Stephen Orr here. Stephen, I'd love to get your take on this. I mean, it really says something, I think, when you've got a potential, contender, a big contender for the Federal Reserve chair position coming out, and he's not skeptical about Bitcoin. He's not, dismissing it, saying, magic internet money for nerds. He's treating it with respect. He's treating it as a reality. What's your read on this? Maybe, the kind of the more recent clips that we saw there, but also the older clip there where he's basically, he's had this position for a while. This isn't something he newly developed. He's been very, let's say, I would almost say deferential toward Bitcoin and respectful of it in terms of its place as a canary in the coal mine. But I'd love to get your read.
Let's say this. God bless Cynthia Lummis for bringing that up, right? And putting him on the spot and making him answer that question. You look at the Fed as it is today compared to the Fed that was maybe even 4 or 5 years ago. Miran now is obviously positive on crypto. And you've got this Fed chair. And let's make no bones about it. He is going to be the next Fed chair. The question mark now is whether or not how Powell is being removed by Trump. I don't think that Powell can be removed as a board governor. He can be removed as chair. So as we interject into Warsh as the chair, that's going to be there. Now, what the question was asked was not about crypto in general, but he's asked about CBDCs, central banks. And you know what? I'm with him on that. We don't need CBDC money. We already have that with Fed Now, and he called Fed Now Fed yesterday. He's already saying that the plan they have in place today is already that's asinine. It's gone, right? It's not used. It is being used, but he doesn't like the way that it is. He also said he wanted the Fed, a new Fed, to be also upgraded in the way that they handle the AI, the way that they handle data, the way that they handle that blockchain behind it. And I agree with him on all of that. I can't wait for him to be interjected as the new chair of the Fed. And I just was meeting with the Bloomberg, Nathan Dean there, public policy, the head of public policy, saying the same thing. Everybody in Washington knows for a fact that he is going to be the new Fed chair. So I think we need to start pivoting ourselves, not thinking that maybe Canny or Willie possibly. No, he is going to be the next Fed chair. So in saying that, he is absolutely right. No CBDCs. The president said that. The vice president said that at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas. We were all there, right? And so when we look at all those, the president has said this. Now the chair that he is picking, but the one thing that he said very interestingly in that meeting, he said, "I'm not even sure why the president picked me." He was very clear about that, right? He's like, "I am going to be independent," and he said something else that I thought was interesting. I am not a sock puppet of the president. So he made it very clear to them, hey, look, what he says and what he does are maybe two different things, but he was very clear. And I think he was very concise. And I could not pick apart anything to be against him on any of this. I'm for him on almost all of this. And politically, I'm probably on the other side of him. So I really was kind of very impressed by the way that he handled himself. And I'm looking forward to him being the new chair of the Federal Reserve.
What do you think? I've seen some conflicting thoughts on what his actual stance will be sort of on rates. Is he a dove? Is he a hawk? But, on the rate side, then also just on the broader monetary policy side, what's your read on how he's going to come in?
I think he's saying that he would like to acknowledge the president's need for the cut of rates. He said it's a broader measure, right? When you cut rates, it helps a broader swath of people. He's absolutely right, including, home buying and housing. He's talking about it from the purchase of cars and leases of cars. He's talking about it from the bigger picture thing of cutting rates. But what he also has to do is the dual mandate, right? You've got to keep inflation in check, and you can't do that by lowering rates because that does put the gas pedal behind it. So he understands the position position of being Fed chair, but he also understands what the president is saying. So he says, I don't want to be a sock puppet. I'm going to be the next Fed chair. So I got to keep my understanding of what I'm being appointed to. I can't just say I'm being appointed to a certain position and not actually do the position, which we've seen some of the of past Fed chairs do, right? Literally do the exact opposite, or getting appointed to the Supreme Court and doing the exact opposite of what the president's asking for. So he knows his position. He knows what he's being asked to do. The question now that we have to ask Kevin Warsh is, what's that first meeting going to be like when he becomes chair? Is he going to go, hey, all right, let's cut rates? I don't think he's going to be able to do that, right? It's going to take him a little bit longer. He is saying he wants better data, and that better data is saying that inflation is pushing up, but not that much. Inflation is saying, hey, you know what? Home buying isn't really happening at the rate that we expected, but we just saw retail sales coming out very high right now. It was really kind of surprising to me. He's also saying that there are also surprise pockets of where the inflation is hurting, and that's in grocery stores. So does cutting rates help groceries? Not really. Does cutting rates help home buying? Yes. So there is that need. We saw the least amount of homes being sold, I think, almost in history, since COVID, at least. That that would help at least in that position where we've seen the number of buyers and sellers at the differentiated, the highest level in history. That's a big deal. So yeah, I think he wants to, but I'm not sure he can right now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, the Federal Reserve Chair also does not act in a vacuum. He's not the dictator. We've got the whole cabal of governors there, who are making decisions, often in lockstep. But I think we have seen a little bit more dissension in the ranks recently. I don't know if you've picked up on that, but there's, typically for a long time, it was like nobody stepped out of line. We've seen that sort of shift a bit recently. Is that something you've been tracking as well?
100%. I mean, the Powell has not been able to keep the troops in line. Normally, it's all the votes are usually the same. They talk it out. They have these 2-day meetings, and by the second day, then Powell comes out and gives a speech. And it used to be a fight over whether he had a red tie or a blue tie, and now he only has one color. It's purple. It's just so he can keep everybody happy. And the truth is, he has it, right? Yeah, the dissension, and they know that people that really do want to have, and like Mirren and talked about, he wants to cut rates. They are in the minority, but that's changing now. And so when you see that change, now they're actually saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to be able to show that I am a dissenter here. I'm not going to go and just be in lockstep just so that we can look like we're together in this. Look, you have to understand that when you are a Fed chair, you are the chair of all of the banking system for the Federal Reserve. But the Federal Reserve is broken into different areas of the country, Minneapolis and St. Louis and New York and Atlanta. They're already telling you that different areas think differently about different positions. And what you see in the southeast, in my case, in Georgia, that we see that now Atlanta, the Atlanta Fed is thinking a little bit different than the Fed in Minneapolis, right? The Fed out west is thinking a little bit differently. We have to understand that, right? So how is it affecting those areas? And those areas are telling us, and we're seeing a lot of that in the beige book, telling us, hey, you know what? In my area, this, and this is happening, and this is why I'm dissenting. And what I've said that since the beginning of this, I love what Mirren is saying. I love what Warsh is saying. And of course, today, Wallace said the same thing. We need better data. We cannot continually to run the Fed on data from the 1950s and 60s. We need to understand that AI needs to be part of the narrative. We need to understand exactly. And I'm on the Atlanta board when I fill out my form every month and tell them how it's affecting my businesses and Quasar markets. And I'm telling them, hey, look, I'm tired of the inflation rate going up. Fix it, right? You have a dual mandate. The other dual mandate part of that is jobs, and jobs losses going up right now because of AI and several things, right? So they know what their job is, but they're not always sitting to it based on the precedents of what's been set in the past. We need to look to the future and do put some AI into the systems.
Yeah, speaking of job losses, the more AI that I think the Fed integrates, some of those 500 plus PhD economists may soon find themselves out of a job. Boy, they've been on the Fed welfare for a while, but they may have to start, learn to code, learn to weld, something like that.
Hey, I got some jobs for them over here. They can come over here. Look, you're absolutely right, Welcome. We talk about it from that perspective. You know, we looked at it from more of an academic over the last 50 years of how to handle the Fed, and we don't pivot as fast as we should. The markets and the world is moving way faster than ever. Let's have a quarterly meeting or a monthly meeting. That's not working anymore. The Fed needs to understand that the world is moving at a much faster pace, and we need to have machines working at that. We can no longer have just PhD level economists working behind the scenes. We also need to have people that are actually employing people that actually know what's really going on in the building trades, that are in the construction trades, that are in, you know, in the movement of things like FedEx and companies like that are in the oil that markets, things that are actually producing manufacturing. The president's talked about this. He wants to go back to a manufacturing country. We know that's not quite going to happen, right? We all know that we're a service country, but we need a little bit of both. And I'm okay with that. I like what the president's saying. I don't always agree with everything he says, but I do understand where he's coming from. And if we're doing that, then the Fed needs to be part of the narrative in the future, not the narrative of the past.
Yeah. I do want to be conscious of the time here. We've got, I think I've got you for another few minutes, and I want to get your take on another story that we have here, sort of getting back into the world of Bitcoin, but also, I mean, it really is just a larger story about markets because the market has been reacting to strategy, Saylor's strategy, taking over BlackRock in Bitcoin holdings. This morning, the stock surged up to $175. It's now up more than 29% over the past week. At last check, sitting at 166. But the catalyst here is clear because Strategy just bought another shockingly large amount, 34,164 Bitcoin, pushing total holdings to 815,061 Bitcoin, making it the single largest holder in the world, ahead of iShares Bitcoin Trust. So that's one corporate treasury now holds more Bitcoin than the biggest ETF on the planet. But the real story here is under the hood, because Saylor has spent years refining the capital stack, and STRC appears to be the breakthrough. It's a perpetual preferred instrument designed to convert global demand for yield directly into Bitcoin accumulation, stripping out the volatility and making it accessible to a much broader investor base. And Saylor is not shy about the end game. He wants as much of the Bitcoin supply as possible. He said it himself last year in Abu Dhabi at Bitcoin Mana. Let's take a look.
We don't have buyer fatigue. I think that we can buy more Bitcoin than the sellers can sell, and we're going to take it all. And we're going to take it out of circulation. In essence, we're winding up the network. We're powering it up like an engine. It's coiling like a Trojan spring of sorts.
And as this chart from River shows, that engine is already dominating flows. Strategy's STRC perpetual preferred stock has driven the purchase of roughly 77,000 Bitcoin so far in 2026, nearly 10 times more than all spot Bitcoin ETFs combined, while the ETFs have added around 8,000 BTC year to date. So Strategy alone has accumulated over 140,000 Bitcoin, with STRC acting as the primary fuel. Now, this is a key shift. Instead of waiting for passive inflows, Strategy is actively manufacturing demand through capital markets and converting it into Bitcoin at scale. Roughly 85% of its latest weekly purchase was funded this way, turning digital credit into Bitcoin in real time. I want to bring back in Stephen here to get your take on this. Stephen, how closely have you been following Strategy, Saylor, what he's been doing with STRC? I mean, it seems that there's been a bit of a larger recognition of Saylor's strategy, pun intended there. This guy has been incredibly high conviction for a long time since he finally really grokked it, since Eric Weiss, his good friend, finally got him to go down that rabbit hole and start buying. And since then, he hasn't looked back, hasn't sold a single sat to anyone's knowledge. What's your read on this? Have you been kind of tracking the STRC saga as well? And how are you looking at this as it relates to markets more broadly?
Yeah, Walker, I mean, that's a great question. I bought my first Bitcoin at 75. I was orange pilled a long time ago. And as we watch the Saylor thing moving forward and STRC, and has he even changed the name of his own company, right, to facilitate his whole thinking. I love Michael Saylor. I love that he has pushed the narrative. I love the fact that he has pushed it into the media in a way that many of us could not do that, right? He's got that ability. But I don't want to be the bank of Michael Saylor, right? I understand understand that Michael Saylor really wants to he wants to own it all, right? But you just can't, because if you don't, then you're controlling the narrative, then you're controlling the flow of that crypto and Bitcoin in this case. And I want to be able to use that Bitcoin, and the rails are very important in order to. And I think a lot of CNBC and Bloomberg all say the same thing. Well, you're not using Bitcoin in the way that you normally were supposed to use it, right? It was going to change the way that we buy and sell things on the planet. It's not changed the way that the IRAs are going to handle Bitcoin. Okay, we understand that's changing, but he understands it because he's seeing the future. He knows what the future is, and so he is buying as much as he can. He's putting his company at a risk a lot of times to be able to buy more and more and more. And as he's doing it, he understands. It's very simple. It's supply and demand. There's not a whole lot more supply. He is buying up the supply faster than the demand is out there, and he is literally eating up the demand faster now than the supply can even pump it out. And you're seeing companies out there that are literally switching from being Bitcoin miners now going into quantum computing and going into AI. Hut 8 is a good example of that, right? And so he understands if there's less miners, if there's less flow of that purchasing power, then he is going to own that demand, all of the demand and the supply. And it's very simple. Less supply, more demand means the price goes up. It's a very simple economics. The question mark is how fast do other people in the media side of things, us, right, that are buying more and more as well. We can't adopt it as fast as he can. And so I understand that. I'm not telling him to slow down. I'm just saying that I think he needs to understand that it needs to be the Walmarts of the world and the Costco's and the Sam's Clubs that also need to start to embrace crypto and being able to Visa and MasterCard, so that as he becomes that bank of Saylor, the MSTR side of it, the STRC side of it, things that he says, okay, you know what, I will help MasterCard and Visa. If you want to use your crypto and you want to be able to use it as payment, okay. But he is saying now, I only want to use Bitcoin as gold, as digital gold, which is okay. But he also needs to understand that there has to be some tangible need for Bitcoin. And we know what that is. That's why you're starting to see people like Tom Lee moving more into Ethereum and not into the Bitcoin that he was originally. You're starting to see the more move into Solana, the meme coin side of things. The rails are changing a bit for some of the big institutional players. And so if he's going to be the institutional player, then if he's going to be the Tom Lee of the Ethereum, then he's got to be the Michael Saylor of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, there are a lot of people using Bitcoin as money every day, myself included. You've also had in this past year, and then even more recently, the developments that Jack Dorsey had with Square. They just turned on Bitcoin for 4 million merchants. Like, nobody's doing that with Solana. Nobody's doing that with Ethereum. Nobody wants to do that with either of those. And it's like, people say, oh, Bitcoin's too slow. Bitcoin's too this. It's just like, anybody who says that to me, I'm just like, I instantly disregard your opinion, because it means you have no idea of any of the other layers that are built on top of Bitcoin. You clearly are either trying to spread misinformation on purpose, or you're just woefully misinformed. In either case, opinion rejected. So, I mean, I think that, it's, in my mind, it's okay for Saylor to view it purely as this digital gold, as this pristine capital, because the beauty of Bitcoin is that you've got other people like Jack Dorsey or just individual plebs all over the place who are deciding, I'm going to focus on the medium of exchange side of this. You know what I mean? It's, it's not a centralized company like Ethereum or Solana. So there's not a centralized marketing team like those guys have over there. But that's the beauty of Bitcoin, is that it doesn't need any one of the individuals there. It doesn't need any corporation. It just is. And people will act in their own self-interest. The game theory works out in Bitcoin's favor at the end of the day. I realize we've come right up to the end of the time here. I do want to give you a chance. Where can people find you if they want to hear more of what you have to say? I know you're CEO and founder of Quasar Markets. What else do you got going on? Where do you want to send folks so they can hear more of what you got?
Yeah, very simple. Thank you so much for having me, Walker. I appreciate the show. It's very simple. It's quasarmarkets.com, and come on, hang out with us a little bit. And we are raising money as well for the company. Invest.quasarmarkets.com as well. But love the show, Walker. I look forward to the next time seeing you.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Appreciate your time here. And guys, we are going to take a quick commercial break. And then when we come back, we've got a few news stories to hit with you before the end of my time here with you on this Tuesday. So do not touch that dial. We'll be right back here with more on RoxomTV. Stay tuned.
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
Welcome back to RoxomTV. The price of Bitcoin is 75,691 infinitely printable Federal Reserve notes per coin. We're into the last little bit of our show here, and we've got a couple more stories for you. Starting with dozens of U.S. military veterans and their family members have been arrested for protesting the Iran war. Yesterday, war veterans, some visibly disabled, some elderly, occupied the rotunda of the Cannon House office building on Capitol Hill. They wore military fatigues, held red tulips in honor of Iranian civilians killed in the war, and performed a flag-folding ceremony for American service members who have died. Capitol Police zip-tied their hands and arrested them one by one. Let's take a look at what the veterans had to say.
As a veteran, I know the harm that wars do to civilian populations, but also to our soldiers. I'm talking about the loss of life. I'm talking about injuries and lives changed forever. I'm talking about PTSD and moral injury, and that's why I'm here today. We heard the same promises and the same excuses and reasoning for the Iraq war that we're hearing today. And they're shifting constantly to justify our presence in the Middle East. And we're not fooled. We as veterans know better.
Congress are the ones who approve it. Where are they? They have that power to stop Trump's recklessness. They have that power, and I don't understand what in the world are they doing. For us civilians to have to come out here, all the way from California, to ask them to step up against Donald Trump, for them to do their job, it is absurd to me that they're not doing anything.
A Quinnipiac poll from March found 53% of Americans oppose the military action against Iran, and 74% oppose sending ground troops. Pew found 61% disapprove of Trump's handling of the conflict. It turns out, shockingly, that people do not like prolonged conflicts in the Middle East. I guess we have not quite had enough of them yet, though. Moving on to our next story in a similar vein, Tucker Carlson, the man who helped put Donald Trump back in the White House, would like you to know that he feels really bad about it, and he said so on his own podcast. In a conversation with his brother Buckley, a former Trump speechwriter, Tucker said he is tormented by his support of the president and wants to apologize for misleading people. Take a look.
Yeah. Like, really, again, it comes back to the obligation that he has, not just to Donald Trump, to everybody else in the country, well beyond Donald Trump. Who cares? He can survive.
So looking back, because, I mean, you and I and everyone else who supported him, you wrote speeches for him, I campaigned for him. I mean, we're implicated in this for sure.
Yes.
It's not enough to say, well, I changed my mind, or like, oh, this is bad, I'm out. It's like, in very small ways, but in real ways, you and me and millions of people like us are the reason this is happening right now.
Yes.
So I do think it's like a moment to wrestle with our own consciences. We'll be tormented by it for a long time. I will be.
The breaking point for Tucker, Iran. Carlson called Trump's language on the war, quote, vile on every level, and says Trump knew it was a betrayal of decades worth of promises not to start new wars and did it anyway. Trump, never one to let something like that go quietly, recently posted that Tucker Carlson is a, quote, low IQ person, always easy to beat, and highly overrated. Well, with friends like that, who needs enemies, right? I do think it is quite interesting to see. I mean, you've seen a lot of falling out from people who were, let's say, staunch Trump supporters for a long time over the war specifically. I think that a lot of this is going to come down to how quickly this ends up getting wrapped up. Does this turn into a protracted and, elongated conflict? Does it turn into another forever war? Or is the United States able to extricate itself from this relatively cleanly and in a relatively short amount of time? I think that wars get less and less popular, obviously, as they go on, as they cost more money. And we've seen, obviously the Iranian regime is a horrible one leading up to the war. They were obviously killing their own citizens by the tens of thousands in the streets when those citizens were protesting the Iranian regime. So this is not a case of, the poor Iranian regime, right? Ultimately, the people that suffer in every war are the ordinary citizens, though, right? Wars are not waged between citizens of countries. They're waged between the states, between the governments, right? And it is ultimately ordinary citizens who pay the price. You've also seen, as, wasn't the case with Venezuela, as is the case with Iran, a lot of the actual people in the countries are happy to see some intervention, some taking out of their leaders who they were, again, protesting in the weeks leading up to this conflict starting. Now, whether or not they hold that opinion as this conflict enters a more protracted stage, let's see. I think that everybody ultimately wants a quick and hopefully not too destructive end to this, but it seems that that end is not coming anytime super soon. And back over in Iran, Iran's foreign ministry has issued a formal statement today calling Sunday's U.S. seizure of cargo ship Tuska criminal, illegal, and maritime piracy. Through the statement, though the statement came with a 2-day delay, it demanded the immediate release of the vessel, its crew, and their families. Iran's military command warned that a, quote, decisive response is coming, but it said is being delayed specifically because family members of the crew are still on board the seized ship. Once they are safe, Iran says it will act. Iranian state media also reported drones were launched toward U.S. military vessels in the area following the seizure, though the U.S. has not confirmed any strikes or damage. The Tuska was seized Sunday after the U.S. disabled its engines following 6 hours of ignored warnings. Tehran is now pointing to the seizure as the primary reason it has refused to confirm attendance at the second round of Islamabad talks. And finally, here to round us out, Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to travel to Islamabad, but it's still unclear exactly when he'll depart. He's traveling with the same team that led the first round of talks, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. A second round of U.S.-Iran negotiations is still being targeted for tomorrow, Wednesday. That's the same day Trump's ceasefire deadline expires, and he's been firm on that timeline. Talk about high-stakes negotiations. Still, it's unclear whether Iran will attend. Pakistani mediators now say Tehran has yet to confirm participation after spending Monday stalling. The Revolutionary Guards are reportedly pressuring negotiators to hold a firmer line. No talks while the U.S. naval blockade remains in place. Trump has repeatedly threatened to, quote, knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran if Tehran doesn't come to the table. Pakistan, the only mediator both sides say they trust, is already locking down Islamabad. Roads are being sealed and security forces deployed around the Serena Hotel. The question now is whether the Iranians will show up at all. And with that, guys, we're ending a little bit early today, but I appreciate everybody tuning in here for my first show back in a couple weeks. We're going to be back to our regularly scheduled programming with my show here on RoxomTV. So that is every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll also be back to joining Hank's show on Thursdays and Fridays at noon Eastern Time. Looking forward to that. Hank and I always have a great time breaking down the day's news for you guys here on Roxom. So thank you to everyone who joined here. Thank you as well to everybody who sent their prayers, their thoughts, their love to Carla, my wife, and to our family. They are very much appreciated as she is on the road to recovery. So thank you all so much. Again, my name is Walker America. I'm here every Tuesday now, back with you again, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Looking forward to seeing you next week. And of course, tune into the rest of the great shows that we have here on Roxom. And I'll be back with Hank as well later this week on Thursday. Until then, thank you so much for sharing your scarce time with me here on RoxomTV. Looking forward to the next one already. I'll see you soon. Take care.